Portland City Council session for February 27th, 2019. Carla, can you please call the roll?
Yes. Fritz.
Here.
Fish.
Here.
Hardesty. Udaley.
Here.
Wheeler.
Thank you. Before we begin, will our city attorney please read the rules of conduct?
Welcome to the Portland City Council. The City Council represents all Portlanders and meets to do the city's business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during City Council meetings so everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions or the first readings of ordinances. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. If it does not, you may be ruled out of order. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow light goes on. When your time is done, a red light goes on. If you are in the audience and would like to show your support for something that is said, please feel free to do a thumbs up. If you want to express that you do not support something, please feel free to do a thumbs down. Please remain seated in council chambers unless entering or exiting. If you are filming the proceedings, please do not use bright lights or disrupt the meeting. Disruptive conduct such as shouting or interrupting testimony or council deliberations will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, a person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass. Thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe.
Thank you. And before we begin today's agenda, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the passing of Oregon Secretary of State Dennis Richardson, who dedicated his career to public service. We send our heartfelt condolences to his friends and family as they grieve his passing. Colleagues, did anyone want to make a comment or? Okay. All right. Carla, we'll now begin with communication items. Carla, please read the first item.
Item 162, a request of Peggy Moretti, Restore Oregon, to address council regarding update on status of historic Jansen Beach Carousel. She had to cancel.
Okay, thank you. Please read the next item.
Okay. The next four have requested to come up together. Okay. 163, request of Mimi Gurman to address council regarding city ignores grassroots orgs proven ability to help houseless with villages. 164, request of Ree Campbell to address council regarding city ignores grassroots orgs proven ability to help houseless with villages. 165, request of Steve Kimes to address council regarding city ignores grassroots orgs proven ability to help houseless with villages. And 166, request of Lisa M. Lake to address council regarding city ignores grassroots orgs proven ability to help houseless with villages.
Welcome. Anyone can begin. Please state your name for the record.
Hi, my name is Mimi Gurman, and a couple months ago I was here to talk with everybody about the need for a village for our folks in St. John's, our houseless people, and I sent a proposal in for what that would look like, and Commissioner Hardesty was wonderful in staying in contact with me, reading all about it, and even though it was requested by the mayor, there was not one response to that information that I sent in, not one. And Commissioner Hardesty, thank you very much for your responses on that, and I really appreciate being heard. What I would like to say is that there will be a village in St. John's that is put up by us, the people, because the city will not have anything to do with it, which is very unfortunate. It's not unfortunate to us. We know what we're doing. We know how to take care of people. We do it every day. We do it every night. We've been not sleeping over the last few weeks because we've been busy getting people to shelters, making sure people have blankets, making sure the people who don't want to go to shelters for their reasons are okay, that we have no deaths as much as we can possibly help that to happen. And a village will be erected. I don't know when, but when it's erected, I expect no pushback from the city. We have come to you, I have come to you repeatedly for the last 2.5 years, telling you what we need in St. John's. We are the desert in St. John's. There are no services. I speak to the people who live outside. I know just about everybody who is in St. John's, including the new people who have arrived on our streets. I speak with them every day. No one comes to them to check in. No one comes to them to ask them if they are on lists for housing. No one comes to them to find out if they are being fed. There is nowhere to be fed. This morning, I was waiting for the bus in St. John's to come here. A man named Robert came to me. There was a piece of cold pizza on the ground. I said, Robert, here's some money. Please go get yourself some breakfast. Would you mind telling me where you're staying? Because I would like to know so I can come give you what you need. What do you need? He told me gloves, hand warmers, blankets, sleeping bags. We're outside. I said, did you want to go to the shelter? I'm sorry to talk so fast, but my 3 minutes is almost up. He said, I've been to the shelter, but they throw people out of the shelter. And he said, last night, they threw out a woman with her dog. I said, Francesca? He said, yes. They have thrown out Francesca numerous times. Her dog weighs 1 pound. Francesca weighs about 2 pounds. She's a very, very small woman. This is what Do Good Multnomah does in St. John's to our people, people I care about in St. John's. Those doors locked during this weather emergency last night at 10 p.m. I'm pretty sure that's illegal during a weather crisis in shelters. So when that village goes up, I'm giving you my transparent notice that that's going to happen.
Thank you. Ree, please state your name for the record.
Good morning. I haven't seen y'all in forever. My name's Ree Campbell. I'm the Code Executive Director of Boots on the Ground PDX. Boy, howdy. It's been too long. I got so many things. I'm going to try to do this really quick. First of all, I really want to talk quickly about the one point of contact office. We were in contact with Hell's administration when that went up, and it was missing its counterpart because Josh Alpert left. It doesn't have the social workers that are meant to go into these camps that are being posted to be swept to help mitigate damages and get people where they need to be and to make reparations with the neighborhood. That's why they give a week's notice. There was supposed to be social workers to come in and help. We're not paid. There's literally no way to do this. Unfortunately, one point of contact has run amok. I'm not going to name any names, but our people are being harmed. And for some reason, the one point of contact office is helping a city contractor gain new contracts. Something smells in Denmark, folks. Putting that in your ear. Next point of business. What Mimi's talking about. I have been told by Jost themselves the reason they don't want to even take a look at our camp model is because it's too much work. They literally want to write checks and be done with it. They are writing checks to orgs that are consistently 40 to 60% under their yearly stated goals. This is a problem for me. We went through the county's RFPQ. We missed their criteria by 6 points. We were told that there would be a remediation process after the thing was over. Never happened. We were never re-engaged. I gave 75 hours last week. I am sorry that I'm crying. I'm exhausted. We're doing outreach during the day, and we're doing shelter shifts at night. This leads into the affordable housing. Sorry, I told you we're everywhere right now. Of course I voted yes on the affordable housing bond, but here's the problem. Affordable housing are not low to moderate income units. In the last year, we've built well over 5,000 affordable units. We have built 500 low to moderate income units. In that same amount of time, 2,000 more people have come out on the streets. How did Homer Williams get 1.5 million of housing money? He didn't go through the RFPQ. Meanwhile, Rich Rogers, 80 units of permanent supportive housing was scrapped for want of $1 million. I understand the money came from TPI, but Homer is a millionaire. Why is he getting money, public funds? I'm sorry he saw somebody get shot in front of his building, but he's a millionaire. He doesn't get to use public funds for his own personal therapy. I have to vote no on the next affordable bond measure if we can't get a check on how these funds are being spent. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. Please state your name for the record.
Steve Kimes.
Yes, I was speaking on behalf.
I am Steve Kimes. Good morning. I am
What's
here.
your real name, please? It's fine that you're substituting.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead and state your name.
I'm Kate Krieger. I'm the crisis arm of Boots on the Ground.
Yeah.
I'm a facsimile of Steve. I'm here to speak about the challenges in working these shelter shifts. Last night, we reached capacity very early on in the evening. When consulting with 211, this is from Central Nazarene Church, we were told that we were disallowed cab services to ferry people to open beds because we are not a recognized shelter of Clackamas County. This is supposed to be one big team. We are supposed to be working together for the good of our city, and being disallowed by county lines while people are dying on the street is unacceptable.
Naz is in Multnomah County, to be clear.
This creates challenges in being able to build a rapport with our guests and allowing them to know that we will step up for them whenever we have the opportunity. When our hands are tied by as little as I was told, a supervisor approval last night is all that it would have taken to get me cab rides, to get people with amputations, with diabetes, with already frostbite on their bodies off the streets and into a bed for the evening. That's all I have to say today.
Would you mind sharing where the shelter is? Or?
Nazarene is on 94th and Southeast Powell, just before the freeway junction.
Thank you. Welcome. Please state your name for the record.
Hi, Lisa Lake, CEO of Advocacy 5, a outreach program for the houseless. I'm going to play off of Kate's. Last night I'm coming off of 5 hours of outreach on the streets last night, going into a 9-hour shift at the shelter because we don't have enough volunteers and people aren't getting paid for the work they should get paid for. We're all qualified, we're all certified in all kinds of crisis management, and I'm sorry, I'm breathing heavy because I had to stop at 7-Eleven where a guy was without shoes outside in the sidewalk, so I had to run around trying to find him shoes. So let me catch my breath. Between Advocacy 5, Boots on the Ground, what Mimi Gurman has in North Portland, Free Hot Soup, we pour out so much time and bodies and food and thousands of pounds of clothing that we get from the public, funds that we get from the public, and we have now just started a peer-to-peer loan system that is helping people stay housed instead of falling onto the streets. It's a lot for us. We do it all with our heart, but we do it with no funding, and we don't get paid for the work we do. I think that what we're all here for is a little recognition of the amount of time and effort we put in. And maybe somehow we can, like Ree said, or Kate said, one big team, start to cooperate and see some of those funds that go into other houseless organizations that really, there's no accountability for their funding from what I can see, or very little accountability. I would love to see those records, blatantly opened up to the public and let all of our orgs let their records stand for themselves.
We're exhausted. We need the city's help. We've been closed out of the process, and we're exhausted.
And any one of us is 6 bad weeks away from this situation that everybody else is in. We owe them a debt.
We helped build the winter response grid, and we've been closed out of that and out of any kind of help from JOS. We can't do this. The funded orgs, they take care of inner southeast and inner northeast and downtown, and the rest of the 140 square miles is on us. It's not sustainable. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to cry. I don't know what else to do at this point. Somebody came into office thinking that they could cure homelessness in a year, and they closed us out of the process. And after they discovered what we're up against, we are still closed out of the process, but we're in the trench digging the ditches.
We applied for the RFPQ. You have to
Because we
score.
were advised to with the
Yep.
impression that we would have a chance of getting somewhere.
Exactly. So the score is 72 point something. We scored a 69.8.
Commissioner Fritz?
Well, first of all, thank you very, very much on behalf of the whole city for all the work and the volunteering that you do. It's really splendid, and I appreciate that. So I have two questions. First of all, I know that there are a lot of other good-hearted Portlanders who would like to help. How would they get in touch with you? Is there an organization? Is there a central point where all of the volunteer shelter services are listed so that people can know to go?
Yes,
Go
all the
help.
shelters have sign up.
And where,
Flexibility.
if somebody's watching this broadcast and wants to volunteer a shift or give you money or whatever, how would they do that?
They can, does the city state what shelters are open?
This
Who
is-
does?
this
The
is-
county?
No, we have.
You can
yeah.
go to Boots on the Ground PDX on
Can
Facebook.
you speak into the microphone, then the captioners get it.
You can go to Boots on the Ground PDX on Facebook for volunteering and supplies, and for funds and donations of that nature, you can go to Advocacy 5 on Facebook. That's the financial arm of One Big Team.
Yeah,
I
thank
also
you.
would like to say that some of our team members were told that if they listed Free Hots or listed Advocacy 5 as their 501c3 on the RFPQ, that they would not be allowed county stores.
Okay, thank you. So that's something maybe for us to think about, is to have a central website where all of the volunteer services could be listed. Because I go to a group called The Gathering in St. John's every quarter, and I know that there's a lot of other churches and other folks who are doing these kinds of outreach efforts, and so it would be nice if we could help coordinate that. Second question is, have you talked to the county about this? Because as you know, the city contracts with the county to provide services for people who are houseless.
I've talked to Deborah Kafori twice, and I went with Lisa to speak with her office about what's going on, as well as what's going on with St. John, specifically with Do Good Multnomah, constantly throwing people out of the shelter and locking people out of the shelter, especially during emergencies.
Okay. I know that their county board has citizen communications, community communications like we do, and I would suggest that bringing it to the entire board's attention would be the way to go, because, as I say, we contract with a Home for Everyone. We're not in charge of that process.
There's a person absent today that is actively blocking any involvement by the grassroots orgs. We never mince words, and we have offended someone irrevocably that cannot get over it, and we are being actively.
Well, as I say, there are community communications opportunities at the county as well, and I would encourage you, you've got a lot of support here and a lot of gratitude for the work that you're doing, and we all need to recognize that we decided that they were going to do the coordination, and so it's there that you need to put your advocacy efforts.
May I say something before we leave?
Briefly,
Is
sure.
that yeah. I would like to say that if the city is going to come up with a main point of focus, that we, any one of us, are consulted first with who would be in charge of that. Because right now the problem is who is in charge of many of these main points of contact for not giving us what we need. So if we have that the same way, set up the same way in the city, we're just having another problem. And by the way, I need 200 blankets for people in St. John's. Is there a way for me to get those?
Well, that's my point. The city doesn't do that. The county does that. And so that's where you need to be making your requests.
I thought you were saying that you also wanted to do that. I
No.
misunderstood.
No, I want to be really clear that we decided that having some services by the city, some by the county, was not wise use of taxpayers' dollars. And if we streamlined it and the city puts in over $30 million to the Joint Office for Homeless Services, then
I guess
that would
our
be the way
main
to go.
concern is that another table has been created that we were not invited to.
We understand that you don't have any direct power. We are here for your support. We need political will for us to be at the table, and there is no political will. If we could get your support, that would be awesome.
I'm going to have to wrap this up. We
Yes.
really need to move on, but thank you all for coming today. I want to acknowledge and thank you for the work that you're doing. I understand your frustrations. I've jotted down some follow-up questions for each of you, but we can't do that right now. Thank you. Carla, have any items been pulled from the consent agenda?
Yes, we have 168 and 171.
Please call the roll on the consent agenda.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish. Aye. Hardesty.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye. Let's see, thank you. The consent agenda is approved. Carla, please read. Well, let's see, what time is it? Oh, it's 9:45, so shall we have our first time certain? Yes, please read that item.
Okay. Item 167, Portland Streetcar Annual Report for 2018.
Okay. One, 167, right, okay. So it's a pleasure to bring forward our one-time certain this morning, the annual report from the Portland Streetcar, our world-class streetcar system. I'm going to let the experts get into the details shortly, but suffice to say that the past year has been an active and exciting one for Portland Streetcar, Inc., our nonprofit that the nonprofit that operates the system in close partnership with the Portland Bureau of Transportation. With my focus on transportation equity, I'm especially proud of the Streetcar Advisory Committee that meets monthly and is made up of a wide array of members that focus on how the system can better serve those with disabilities and our elderly community, two groups who use the streetcar in substantial numbers. With that said, let's hear from our panel. Transportation Interim Director Chris Warner, PSI Executive Director Dan Bauer, and Board of Directors Chair Dennis Allen. Welcome, and please state your name for the record as you begin.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner, and the rest of the council. For the record, Chris Warner, the Interim Director of the Portland Bureau of Transportation. I'd also like to recognize Catherine Levine, who is the Division Manager for Streetcar and is the one of the all-stars at PBOT that really does the day-to-day operations streetcar. Really appreciate her work. So this is the 5th annual report for the Portland Streetcar performance, and here we are talking about 2018. Streetcar, as the Commissioner said, is owned and operated by the City of Portland. We contract with the nonprofit Portland Streetcar, Inc. and its Board of Directors for operations assistance, vision, and advocacy. And we also, it's an important partnership we have with TriMet, which provides rail transit operators and mechanics, as well as over $8 million every year in operations funding for streetcar. Streetcar service supports our shared goals for a livable community and served by as the Commissioner said, the accessibility and the part of public transit is very important for us. We continue to see denser urban development in the central city, and the influence that these fixed rails have really does help shape our city and how people choose to get around. One statistic I'll throw out as we move to the slides is 49% of all housing units built in Portland within the last 20 years were constructed within a quarter mile of the streetcar tracks, and that includes a third of all subsidized affordable housing in the city of Portland. Additionally, Streetcar is a proud partner in the region's low-income fare program, which is operated by TriMet. And the city is also, as we implement our enhanced transit corridors, we will be using this fixed rail asset we have in Streetcar in order to make the central city move even better. Today, the Streetcar carries more passengers per day than 2 of our light rail lines and more than any one bus line in the city. It's critical that we work together to keep the trains moving, and as we have more growth and housing in the central city, we're really excited about the opportunity that Streetcar presents for us. A couple of things that I'll highlight before I turn it over to Dennis and Dan is we're very excited to announce that our contractor will soon be implementing the improvements on Northeast Grand Avenue at the 84 on-ramp, which has been quite a kind of a bottleneck for the streetcar on the east side. And then we'll also to increase the reliability of the system, with your assistance, we've actually in the process of purchasing 3 new streetcars. Those streetcars you approved in 2018, which we built here in America at Brookville in Pennsylvania. And this will really help us make sure that our fleet, we have the spare cars, but also as we improve the amount of service that we give on the existing streetcar, it's having these new streetcars is vitally important. Council also approved in the last budget $370,000 for developing cost and benefit analysis and the land use services for the possible extension of the streetcar into Northwest Portland. We'll be talking about that. And we'll also be talking about a federal grant that we had from the FTA, which will also do some additional analysis for equity work and land use and mobility challenges that we have in Northwest Portland and where we're going in the future. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dennis, who is the chair of the Portland Streetcar Inc. board, and he'll take it from there.
Thanks. Good morning. Dennis Allen, board chair for Portland Streetcar Inc. Thanks for having us. PSI, as we call it, was formed over 25 years ago with the same goal that we have today. It's a public-private partnership where all the stakeholders have an input and a say into the streetcar system that they have together funded. Our board consists of 16 members. It's always been a mix of public institutions, transit professionals, transit advocates, nonprofit and for-profit real estate owners that are along and near the line usually, as well as key members of the city bureaus and TriMet. So a very collaborative group that gets together periodically and has their say in how the streetcar operations are run. Our current and ongoing goals for the organization are to focus on the current operations and serving our riders the best way we can. So right now that includes focus on the operations, on vehicle procurement and getting some new vehicles to keep those operations going, as well as expansion in the right areas, which Dan will talk some about, and so that we in the city can achieve our shared goals of climate, housing, and jobs. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Dennis. Excuse me. My name is Dan Bauer. I'm the executive director of Portland Streetcar Inc. Actually, the 2 previous speakers have covered a litany of highlights for the year. So I think we have pictures to go along with that, but I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to understand what we're working on and understands the opportunities where you can plug in and help us make our project more successful. Just real quick for context here, there's the map of our system now. We have 3 lines, the north-south line from South Waterfront to Northwest 23rd, and then the A loop and the B loop, which cross the Tillicum and Broadway bridges going clockwise and counterclockwise. We carry about 15,500 passengers per day, which is a very, very successful transit system in the city. And as Chris was saying, that's actually more than 2 of our light rail lines and more than any bus line in the city. So very, very heavily used system. I want to just highlight this ramp. One thing we did this year was we installed automatic passenger counters on all of our trains, so we can finally begin to have a more robust conversation about who's riding and where and what's being accessed. And this is a heat map showing how often we're deploying our ADA curb ramps across the system. We deploy the ramps more than 35 times per hour across the system, which is a rate 5 times that of the TriMet system. So we have a lot of people living downtown trying to access services using the streetcar to move around. The other thing I want to highlight is we're currently running 12 streetcars. For the last 3 years, we've been running 14 during the peak. We've had to cut that down to 12 due to some maintenance issues that we'll talk about in a little bit. Chris mentioned our business access transit lane. I think I've been sitting in this chair for almost 5 years talking about this project. But we are excited to have a contractor on board beginning in March. This is just a visual of what's going to occur there. But we had nice long conversations about enhanced transit corridors in this council, and I think it's really exciting the city's moving forward on keeping the buses moving and keeping the streetcar moving. And this will give us a chance to move the B loop through rush hour through Grand and Davis. So we're very excited about that. So those are great transportation metrics, but the streetcar story obviously contains 2 sides. We have to talk about the land use piece as well when it comes to the benefits. As Chris said, almost nearly half of the housing in the city in the last 20 years has been built directly on the streetcar line. That is a plan. That is exactly what the city wanted to do, and that's exactly what's happening. That's not an accident. We have a lot more planned under construction. Nearly 1/3 of all the jobs in the city are on the streetcar line, and over 1/3 of all subsidized affordable housing units are on the streetcar line. Now, the people who ride the system, just like any other transit system in the world, happen to be the people who live right next to it. So again, our demographics, which we've been updating on an annual basis, they match the people who live next to the streetcar line. So those who ride the streetcar are the exact same people that live next to it. We have a significant number of people who don't have cars. So again, consistent with our comp plan goals about reducing car ownership. A significant number of people using the low-income fare program, and a lot of people just using the system to go about their daily lives and reach services in the central city. Talking more about maintenance on the maintenance side, which is actually probably our most challenging year in terms of keeping our fleet in place. These are two pictures of massive derailments that we had this year. The car on the top right is still out of service. It's going to be out of service for quite a while. We currently have, I think, 4, maybe 5 streetcars on, I guess we'll call it long-term disability. We don't expect to have enough cars to run our normal service for quite some time. So we are running 12 cars, we have 0 spares, and that's our new service right now. So it's a train every 20 minutes on the east side and a train about every 10 minutes on the west side. In addition to just things like this happening, 7 of our cars are now 19 years old. And if you get on them, you can see that they look midlife, and they are ready for some type of refurbishment process to begin. So we're gonna have to have a conversation about what we want to do with these cars that are now 20 years old and are going to need some type of midlife refurbishment as we move forward. I spent the last week in Brookville, Pennsylvania, which you can see some pictures from here. This is a very small town. It's about 3,500 people in the middle of nowhere, kind of near where Puxatawny Phil hangs out for Groundhog's Day. But they are actively building our projects right now. This is actually, this project being built here was for Milwaukee. But we are working with Sound Transit now to move that project along, and we're feeling pretty good about that, yeah.
If the manufacturing plant's in the middle of Pennsylvania, in the middle of nowhere, how do these cars get delivered to Portland?
Truck. It costs about $120,000 to ship them from Pennsylvania to here on truck.
By truck?
Yeah.
A diesel truck.
I would guess, yeah.
A wide load.
Yeah.
That's it, that's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. I remind them that we have a manufacturing facility in Test Track, 10 miles outside of downtown Portland, but we haven't gotten there yet. You can see the new paint schemes for some of the cars on the bottom left here. So there's just the cars are just ever so slightly different than what we have today in terms of where the windows are and where the doors are. So we had to develop a little bit different paint scheme, but we have those available if people want to dig into that fun topic. So those will be ready. The first one will be delivered in August 2020 at this point, and then every 2 months from that point on. Okay, these are pictures of those cars operating in Milwaukee on the top and Oklahoma City on the bottom. The cars will look a little bit different than these, not quite so round on the nose, but you can get a sense of the new product that's out there right now. And I would say we also had new systems opening up in Milwaukee, El Paso, and Oklahoma City, but other cities like Tacoma, Seattle, Kansas City are actively expanding their streetcar system because they're seeing what's happening in their community and they're wanting to have the project begin to accrue more benefits there. So we're doing the same thing here in Portland. Chris talked about our opportunity in Northwest Portland. I want to just spend a little bit of time to make sure everybody knows what's happening there. We have, for some time, been pursuing an extension of the streetcar system to essentially the Montgomery Park as a terminus. This will be up at 27th and Wilson. Montgomery Park is the second largest office building in Oregon. It has about 3,500 employees. Every one of them gets free parking. It's surrounded by 18 acres of mixed-use land, and next to that is the former ESCO site, which is about 20 acres, which during the comp plan, you all changed the land use from industrial to general employment. So between those two parcels, you've got a fairly significant opportunity to think about shaping the city and thinking about achieving some of the goals that we're all pursuing in terms of climate change, affordable housing, and access to services and jobs. And I would encourage the city to be aggressive in this conversation. We are a piece of it, but we're not the only piece. It's a broad conversation. So we have a couple of things going on this front. Well, let me just highlight, first of all, this map is showing the streetcar extension going from Montgomery Park, tying into our existing system at 18th and 19th, crossing the Broadway Bridge with a new turnaround at Convention Center, which would allow us to have 7-minute service between where the system ties in at 18th and 19th and the Convention Center. So Lloyd District to Pearl District would go from what we have today at 20-minute headways to something more like 7 to 10. So that's a significant benefit on both sides. Chris talked about some of the funds we're using to pursue this conversation. We essentially have 3 funding sources going on right now. There's what PSI is fundraising privately with our own fundraising efforts through property owners or anybody else. And we're looking at trying to answer some of the questions that are probably more on the private side in terms of if we were to pursue a local improvement district, what would that look like? Pursuing graphics and communications to help the property owners understand what's happening. And then we're doing the project management and trying to stay at the middle of the conversation, which has the opportunity to kind of get pulled in a lot of different directions. So we're kind of there as a leadership role and convening body. We have the $370,000 that was provided by the general fund this current fiscal year, and that's on the bottom left here. You can see a majority of those funds are going to the Bureau of Planning. We're talking about potential land use scenarios in Northwest Portland and what that would look like from a housing and jobs balance, and how much affordable housing could be provided if you pursued X, Y, and Z zoning changes. And then also, the Bureau of Planning is leading a equity analysis or equity balance sheet conversation, trying to identify who's benefiting and who's being burdened by both the costs and the benefits of the streetcar extension. So that is a conversation led by the Bureau of Planning with Prosper and the Housing Bureau and PBOT and PSI staff. So we can talk more about that as we need to.
Mr. Bauer, if I could just interject, I think it was Willamette Week ran an article this week about the possible Northwest expansion or extension, and indicated that the 3 cars we have on order are for that expansion. If you could speak to that.
That is not correct.
That is not correct, yeah. I just wanted to put that out there, although I'm very supportive of and excited about this potential extension. Those cars are to increase capacity on our existing lines.
Correct. Yes, this would require, we think, probably 6 cars and an expansion of the maintenance facility.
And we haven't actually made that decision yet.
Nope. Nope. And the one thing I want to impress upon everybody is this conversation is very early. So let's tee up the questions now so we can make sure we're answering the right questions. And we don't have to tee them up now. We can provide opportunities. But let me just kind of flag through the scope of work.
One
so
moment.
Can see.
Commissioner Hardesty.
I do have a question. Thank you, Commissioner. So there's conversation about creating a service improvement district before we've actually, who's involved in that conversation? And is it just the property owners that are standing to benefit significantly if we make this expansion? So why is that conversation happening separate from the bigger, broader policy conversation?
I wouldn't say it's a detailed conversation. It's a conversation about if we're going to go down this path. Historically, we've used a certain type of funding mix to get to the outcome of streetcar, and that tends to be in the 10 to 15% of the capital project is funded by the property owners adjacent to the streetcar line. That's how we've done it in the past. They are wanting to have the conversation of what would that look like if we applied that methodology to this community? What would the burden be on the property owners? And that's about as far as they've taken it.
So I just want to be clear that I don't want deals being cut before we've had the opportunity to have our due diligent deliberation, because I am very concerned that these property owners stand to make a small fortune if we decide to develop in that area, and we should not be driven based on their profit, but we should be driven based on the city's needs.
I think they would agree, and they would welcome input from the city.
Yeah, and I think any kind of local improvement district would have to come to council, so it's...
Certainly.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, though, by the time it comes to council, you've already worked out a deal. And so I'd like to see us be much more proactive so that the council actually gets to be involved in the deliberation before the deal is cut.
Sure. Yeah, we'll keep council informed in terms of all the activities. So.
With LRDs, we do occasionally change them when they get to council.
I think everybody involved in the project would agree with what you're saying. Yeah, this is me early on flagging that we need to be starting to have this conversation because it's happening, and if you're up there, you can see the development is occurring with or without. This is happening.
Can I ask a question? Because I just want to make sure that we're not conflating issues here. There was some talk once upon a time of baseball taking a look at ESCO as the possible site. The conversation about connecting Montgomery Park began independent of baseball. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
And also, to what extent are you doing forecasting about the kinds of population growth and other growth in that area that A, streetcar might help leverage, and B, serve? Mm-hmm. So in terms of your planning, how do you look at an opportunity like that? Do you look at it as the leverage to get the development, or do you look at it as, in part, serving what you anticipate to be the population. And it's already obviously it's already a pretty dense neighborhood, that part of Northwest. So
it's a mix. There are existing destinations there, like we talked about. The Montgomery Park is a very large employment site. I would offer there's not a lot of population there right now. It is currently zoned industrial, fairly low density land for the most part. We are looking for an opportunity to examine the potential land use changes. So you have what is there today. What the Bureau of Planning is using the money for, both the FTA grant as well as the city money, is to examine 5 different land use scenarios. So if we shifted it from A to B to C to D, how much housing would that produce? How much affordable housing would that produce? And then what type of jobs would that produce? And then from there, you can kind of get a projection of, does that match up with our expectations for ridership?
The other thing I'll just note, and we've had this conversation before at council, is that we have a number of failed infrastructure systems within this district. I mean, we had anticipated, for example, that 23rd and 405 would become over time tough. I use that route a lot. I mean, it is really burdened. So one of the things I'll be interested in is, given the tremendous strains on the existing infrastructure in that part of Northwest, how much of that burden do we take off through fixed rail? How do we address some of the structural problems? Because there's a lot of traffic, and that particular intersection is I think you describe it as a failed intersection in terms of the volume of cars.
That's a great question. And
I'm looking at Chris when I said you. I didn't mean
no, I know.
PSI.
I would agree.
No, absolutely. And one of the things, in fact, I think we'll be doing this later this week, is TriMet, with the help of us, will be doing bus service from Northeast Portland across the Fremont Bridge to Northwest Portland. So that's something that we're launching, and hopefully that can take a little bit of strain off the intersection. But that's always been a very challenging intersection, and I know we do have plans to try to address it. But it's a big, expensive undertaking. So, but I think incremental changes, I think, are in the future.
Thank you.
Slides are very vague here. Actually, just the last piece there is the FTA grant. So Metro applied for and received a $1.3 million grant from the Federal Transit Administration. This is a transit-oriented development planning grant. You can spend the money on land use planning and on transportation planning, but you cannot spend it on rail engineering planning. And Commissioner Fish, this would be where you get to answer the question of what are the transportation issues today and what would they be in a future land use scenario? And what projects do we need to have teed up in order to support either a new community or the existing community? So the FTA grant will support land use planning and transportation planning around the planned investment. So those 3 things together, the city money, the PSI fundraising money, and the FTA grant, are all kind of occurring at the same time. We're just beginning the work now. And I want to just use this as an opportunity to make sure you all have a chance to either ask questions today or follow up with us in the future to make sure that our scope of work is what you have in mind, because now really is the time. I think I'll leave it there.
I think that concludes our presentation.
Great. Thank you all for being here. Do I hear a motion to accept the report?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Fish and a second from Commissioner Hardesty. Carla, please call the roll.
Fritz.
So over the years, I've gone from being very highly skeptical about the streetcar and thinking that it was, kind of playground for the rich, to looking at every year your reports, which continue to get better and better. And thank you so much for the work that's Portland Streetcar Inc. and the partnership with Portland Bureau of Transportation is an exemplary one. And I really appreciate all of the work that many people here have done. Let's just highlight again, 32% of streetcar riders earn under $30,000 a year. So this is not a vehicle for the rich. 38% of streetcar riders come from households without a car. 23% of streetcar riders do not have a driver's license. And as you said, streetcar drivers use the mobility ramp, or more particularly, people using mobility devices use the motility ramps 35 times per hour, which I think you said is 5 times what TriMet does. So it's really impressive. It's a people mover. And it's notable. It's 100% renewable energy, 0 emissions. It's both a job creator and a land use planning tool. And everything that Commissioner Charlie Hale said was going to happen, in fact, has happened. And I greatly appreciate all of the work that Bureau Directors, Commissioners in Charge, and the Streetcar Inc. board and staff have done over many years. Catherine Levine, thank you for all your work as well. This is the kind of thing that Portland does well, and I appreciate all the work. Aye.
Fish?
Dennis, thank you for your service. How long have you been the board chair?
Little under a year, but I've been on the board for 6.
And you took over from?
For Jim Mark.
Jim Mark, right. Well, I remember, I'm old enough to remember working with you previously when you were helping to lead negotiations or discussions about the Zidell development, and now doing this. So this is pure public service, so thank you for doing it. Thank you for your service. I want to just echo what Commissioner Fritz said. I think I was an early streetcar skeptic, trying to understand how it fit into an integrated system and who it served and what were the benefits. This, in your 5th annual report, I think you've made clear what the benefits are. You know, I live and work downtown, and I don't have a car. So it's important to me to have a range of choices. I'm doing a lot more walking, ride share, bumming rides off my daughter. Just trying to be strategic about how I get around. And it is the most liberating thing in the world not to actually have to focus on owning and operating a car. It's completely liberating. And there's so many other choices. And you know, even with my neuropathy, frankly, if I end up being able to take a longer walk, you take in the city and you see things that you wouldn't see just driving around. So it's an excellent report. I also want to pull out a couple of statistics that you gave us. 82% on time. That's actually remarkable, given how congested some of the routes are that you're operating on and how constrained they are. So congratulations on that. 15,000 riders. Of the 15,000 riders, do we have a sense how many of those are tourists?
What we published in the before is less than 5%.
Less than 5%?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which is that's still 300,000 people a year.
That's a lot of people.
Insignificant, but that's not the basis of our ridership, nor should it be.
Okay, so we get about 16 million visitors a year, and we're saying that about 300,000 people use it. I mean,
our lowest ridership stop is the convention center. How's that?
Yeah. My anecdotal sense is I see a lot of people who are visiting our city that use the streetcar just to I think one of the goals of streetcar over time is to be able to get you downtown from one place to another faster than it would take you to walk. So, and that has a lot to do with what PBOT is looking at in terms of circulation and how to speed things up and create better mobility downtown. The land use piece is the extra dividend of streetcar. And if the conversations do heat up about the ESCO site, which is obviously a terrific site, my guess is it's going to have huge environmental issues before you ever get to the day that there's development. But if we do get to a point of development, it's also an enormous opportunity to build in specific concrete goals around affordable housing. And as we think about adding infrastructure and streetcar and providing benefits and public resources, we should make sure that we get the best possible deal. And I would like to see a neighborhood as integrated as the Pearl is in terms of affordable housing and market rate housing. Thank you for an excellent report. I'm pleased to accept it. Aye.
Hardesty?
Thank you. I guess I'm the new skeptic. And so I don't know how long it took the other two commissioners to not be a skeptic, but I'm always concerned when we present information in a way that paints a picture that I question. As I said in my office, I've seen heavy enforcement in areas that are not in the Pearl, right? So in the Lloyd Center area, and I've asked for additional information about how poor people are experiencing the streetcar, right? I'd like to know more about whether this is a commuting vehicle or whether this is just a fun vehicle that people use because they want to do something fun in Northwest Portland. I trust my colleagues. I know they've done their due diligence, but I'm a show-me person, so I'm going to be skeptical until you show me the information that makes me comfortable with thinking that this is an investment that works for all Portland. I want to continue to look at the data to make sure that this is being used as intended, which is an opportunity to get people around town. But if we're talking about getting people out of cars, and we're talking about getting people out of cars during rush hour, does this make sense? Because many of the cars I've been in are pretty small, and so you put a couple of wheelchairs in there, and then you can't get a lot of other people in there, right? So just know I thank you for the report. It's very well done, but I'm not sold yet that you should be expanding or we should be investing more dollars. Aye.
Hardesty, Udaley?
Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you for the report. My colleagues have already extolled many of the virtues of the streetcar that I would have covered. So I'll just say, as a public transit user, and especially someone who's often traveling with a wheelchair user, that the streetcar is my favorite form of public transit. It's the most kind of seamless entry. It's much more flexible than the buses and MAX as far as where we're able to be. And I've never had to let a streetcar go by and not ride it because the wheelchair spots were taken up, which I really appreciate. Also, I think I'll just take this opportunity to let the public know that the TriMet's low-income reduced fares also apply to streetcar, correct?
Yep.
And if you're interested in finding out if you qualify for that program, just go to trimet.org. And with that, I vote aye, and the report is accepted.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Carla, please read item 178.
Appoint Bruce Nelson and reappoint Vivek Shandis and Danielle Newberry to the Portland Urban Forestry Commission for terms to expire February 28, 2023.
Commissioner Fish.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Before I introduce Jen Cairo, the city forester, I want to just provide some very brief introductory remarks. The Urban Forestry Commission is comprised of 11 community members who volunteer their time to advise the city forester, the parks director, the commissioner in charge of parks, and city council on matters pertaining to trees in our city. The commissioner also acts as an appeals board, the commission also acts as an appeals board for certain tree permits, nominates new and approves removal of heritage trees, and plays a significant role in updating the city's urban forest management plan. The acceptance of today's report will appoint one new commissioner, Bruce Nelson. Mr. Nelson has 30 years of experience as an arborist and horticulturalist and has been a volunteer for Friends of Trees for over 20 years. In addition, we're proposing to reappoint two commissioners to their second terms, Vivek Shandis, Professor of Urban Studies and Planning at Portland State University. Mr. Shandis has published over 50 peer-reviewed publications and 2 books, which provide practical guidance to decision makers about addressing environmental issues. And Daniel Newberry, who is currently Executive Director of the Johnson Creek Watershed Council, has held a variety of leadership positions in the field of forestry. Mr. Newberry has a master's degree in forest science from the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. I want to begin by thanking all these community members for their important volunteer service on the commission and for agreeing to be considered for appointment. And I'm also pleased this morning to introduce Jen Cairo, the city forester, to make some additional remarks and to answer any of your questions. Welcome, Jen.
Good morning. Thank you, Commissioner Fish. Good morning, Commissioner Hardesty, Commissioner Fritz, and Commissioner Udaley. My only addition would be that we're fortunate to have some pretty exceptional candidates to advise the city on its forestry policies. So I'd ask that you approve those appointments and the reappointments. That's it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Colleagues? Commissioner Fritz?
What are some of the issues that the Urban Forestry Commission will be looking at over the coming year?
Great question, Commissioner Fritz. Just last week, the Commission held its annual work plan development session, and some of the things that they are interested in looking at, there are about 5 of those. The first 2 are related to Title 11, the tree code. and possible amendments to the tree code. So they'll be looking at what amendments might be and thinking about what their priorities for those would be. One in particular is what we call the large tree amendment for removal of large trees in development situations. That's a temporary amendment that expires the end of this calendar year, so that's a timely item. They'll also be looking at how to structure communications and outreach to the public around tree advocacy and understanding of tree services to all of us in the city. They'll also be looking at their structure for their committees. There are 2 required committees by city code that the Forestry Commission operates, the Heritage Tree Committee and the Appeals Board, which hears resident property owner appeals of certain tree permit decisions. And there are also some ad hoc committees that they'll be looking at how those are structured. So those are some of the things they're focusing on this calendar year. They also have a handful, which is a lot for a volunteer group, of code-required duties that they always perform, such as advising me, Commissioner Fish, Director Adina Long, and you folks on budget as it affects urban forestry.
Thank you. And you mentioned heritage trees. What's the timeline for people to submit nominations for heritage trees?
Thank you, Commissioner. We prefer to receive heritage tree nominations by around May 1st of each year. They can be submitted on a rolling basis. We process them usually in the spring and early summer.
So people can go to the website right now and nominate trees that they own.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Do I hear a motion to accept the report?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Hardesty and a second from Commissioner Fritz. Carla, please call the roll.
Fritz?
Jane Carey, thank you for your service as this city's urban forester, and thank you very much to both the new appointee and the repeat appointees. Thank you, Commissioner Fish, for your support of this important commission. Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Hardesty?
Aye.
Udaly?
Thank you, and thank you also to the nominees for their service to the city. We're really lucky to have such amazing experts. And I just want to put it out there that you have a couple tree huggers in myself, as well as Michael, who is the project manager for Fixing Our Streets, who actually has a background in forestry, I just learned yesterday. So if you ever need some extra support, you know where to come. I vote aye. The report is accepted. Carla, please read item 179.
Thank you.
Amend fee schedules for land use services.
Oops, sorry. This is a second reading. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Carla, please call the roll.
Fritz?
Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Hardesty?
Aye.
Udaly?
Aye. Thank you. The ordinance is adopted. Carla, please read item 180.
Amend Civil Rights Code to add non-religion such as atheism, agnosticism, and non-belief to the definition of religion.
This is a second reading. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Carla, please call the roll.
Fritz?
Well, thanks again to Cheryl Colby, the president of Freedom from Religion Portland Area Chapter, for bringing to my attention the issue of lack of clarity in our Civil Rights Code to ensure protections against discrimination based on non-religion. Your advocacy has helped us to this moment, and thank you. It's nice to see you here today. I also thank Kimberly McCullough, Policy Director for American Civil Liberties Union of Oregon, the Human Rights Commission, City Attorney's Office, the Office of Equity and Human Rights, the City Equity Managers, my former staff are Goldan Salazar, and my current staff are Cynthia Castro and Claire Adamsick. The proposed changes to our city civil rights code may seem like a minor tweak, but they are significant for the many, many Portlanders who identify as non-religious. This has become abundantly clear to me through the community testimony I've received. And I would have to say, remarkably, I have not received one email against this proposal. And I think that that speaks to the welcoming and inclusive nature of our sanctuary city. And I apologize to anybody who has emailed me, and I didn't notice it, but I've been looking, and it's been remarkable how much community input has been supportive of what we're doing. By passing, it kind of affirms, well, it very much affirms my belief in Portlanders as fair and welcoming people who acknowledge civil rights for everybody. By passing this ordinance, we're sending a message that we value non-believers and affirm that protections of our civil rights code extend to them. With this declaration, perhaps more non-believers will feel less fearful of being themselves in the open. We're fortunate that the existing Oregon courts have recognized the inclusion of non-religion in the protected class of religion. We must have greater certainty that this will consistently be the case in the city of Portland. I'm very grateful to my colleagues for considering this, and in particular to Mayor Wheeler, who has been very supportive and who said at the hearing that he was sorry that we put this over so that I could vote for it when he was not going to be here. So thanks to Mayor Wheeler for his leadership. To the best of our knowledge, Portland will become only the second American city to pass this legislation after Madison, Wisconsin, and I hope others will join us. And finally, I'm particularly grateful to my father-in-law, Edward Fritz, who is a colonel in the Salvation Army. I asked him what his opinion of this is, and he said, "Your ordinance is an amplification of our constitutional rights in this country, rights that at times have been denied or ignored. Religious belief or lack of it is never grounds for the denial of our constitutional and legal rights barring discrimination. While we are free to choose what we believe, we are not free to use our beliefs to violate the rights of others guaranteed by the law of the land." So thank you, Colonels Edward and Emily, watching at Cherrywood Village, and I'm happy to vote aye.
Fish.
Commissioner Frisch, thank you for bringing this forward and for making such a compelling case, and today I'm pleased to join you in voting aye.
Hardesty.
Aye. Aye.
Udaly.
Thank you, Commissioner Fritz. I missed the first reading of this. I'm happy to be here for the vote. This seems especially fitting, given that Oregon is a state with among states with the lowest rate of religious adherence. I myself would identify as an agnostic, and while I respect all religions, I reject intolerance towards everyone. So I'm happy to vote aye. Thank you. The ordinance is adopted. Carla, please read item 181.
Authorize the Bureau of Environmental Services to acquire certain permanent property rights necessary for Columbia Slough water quality improvements through the exercise of the city's eminent domain authority.
All right, this item has already been heard and testimony was taken last week. Colleagues, is there any further discussion? Okay, this is an emergency item. Carla, please call the roll.
Fritz.
Oh, aye.
Fish.
Want to thank Nancy Hendrickson and the team at BES who made the presentation. Would like to thank the Warren family for their generous donation of 11 acres of open space. We are going to do this through a friendly condemnation, which means that ultimately we'll take the land without any liabilities attached to the land. And this is in a particularly sensitive area around the Columbia Slough watershed. So it's a good deal for the city, and I'm pleased to vote aye.
Hardesty.
I learned a lot about eminent domain over the course of my due diligence on this issue, and I support the work that's being done, and so I'm happy to join my colleagues in voting aye.
Udaly.
Aye, the ordinance is adopted. Carla, please read.
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Could I make a request that we move up several items that I pulled from the consent agenda? I have all these wonderful firefighters sitting here patiently waiting for us to get to two agenda items. Would it be okay to move those up? That would be agenda item 171 and agenda item 168.
Sure. Typically, we move pulled items to the end of the agenda, but I'm happy to accommodate you, especially since we have people ready and waiting to present. So, Carla, please read item 168.
Pay bodily injury claim of Isidro Guzman Villaluazo in the sum of $25,414 resulting from a motor vehicle collision involving the Portland Fire Bureau.
So if I may, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I really greatly appreciate you allowing me to move these agenda items up. I know my firefighting team would be very happy to sit here until we made it happen, but I feel compelled because I was the one that pulled these off the consent. And so the first one I pulled that we're talking about now, 168, is in reference to a accident that took place with a fire engine. We all know how big fire engines are. We know how fast they must go sometimes to address the emergency that's ahead of them. And in this particular case, there was an injury, unfortunately. I totally support the resolution of this injury, but wanted to make sure, because I tend to pull off the consent agenda police accident ones. I did not want people to think that I was only concerned about police cars having accidents. But of course, we all want to make sure that we're driving as safely as possible. But I wanted to make sure that this was on the public record.
Thank you.
And that's all I have to say. If you'd like to add anything.
My name's Karen Bond, and I'm with Risk Management, and I don't have anything to add, actually. With me is John Durr. He was here in case there were any procedural questions that were going to be asked about the fire department.
Commissioner Fritz?
Has there been follow-up with the driver?
Yes, it has. I'm John Durham, Chief Safety Officer for the Fire Bureau, and all our accidents are reviewed internally.
Could we not call them accidents? They're crashes. And so, because, you know, under Vision Zero, we're trying to get to the point where there are no crashes, and I personally believe that all crashes are avoidable, or almost all. So sorry to interrupt, but...
Nope, that's correct. So we view them as preventable or non-preventable, and this was definitely a preventable accident, crash. And we review all of them, and we look for ways to remediate those in the future for all crashes.
And that includes presumably more training for the person involved, or?
Correct. We look at that one incident in general and review for extra training for them or policies that need to be reviewed or changed for the Bureau-wide. And then we also move outside of that to determine if there's any apparatus design, road design, or anything else, that other factors that we can influence to help prevent these in the future.
And do you look at the driver's record of challenges over time as well?
Correct, we do. We keep full records of any crashes throughout their career.
Thank you.
All right. Carla, I know there wasn't a sign-up sheet for this. Is there anyone here that wanted to give testimony relevant to this item, which is whether or not we should pass an ordinance paying bodily injury claim? Mr. Johnson, and the list is closed.
Good morning, Commissioner. Charles Bridge Crane Johnson, and I want to thank Commissioner Hardesty for this equity. I think that some of us are sometimes accused of being harsh on the police department, but what we really want is equitable, fair lens applied to every bureau of the city government. And we sometimes feel that a particular bureau of the city government does not get due scrutiny or kind of goes on with impunity. So I'm glad that this item, where the victim's attorney, Lord Sanchez, and Karen here have come to a just resolution to help an injured party recover their medical expenses. Obviously, the council should go ahead and approve this relatively low budget item, but I just thought it was important that people come forth and say that when people try and pull these things from the agenda when it's that other bureau, what we're really talking about is not picking on any particular bureau or type of employee, but trying to get every city employee to live up to the highest standards and be the best public servants they can. Thank you.
All right, that concludes public testimony. Carla, please call the roll.
Fritz.
Well, thank you to Commissioner Hardesty for pulling this. Thank you to both of you for being here today and giving such good explanations. I appreciate it. Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Udaley.
Aye. The ordinance is adopted. Carla, please read item 171.
Thank you. This is
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Commissioner. This is one of those issues that I know all of our officers will hear about, and so I thought it was appropriate for us to have a public dialogue about it. What we have found in the Fire Bureau is that many times there are nursing homes and facilities that use our firefighters as their lift providers. And so, which means that they get many, many, many repeat calls to the same facilities for the same issue, because the staff have been directed to not lift patients. And we believe that it's inappropriate to be using public services for this particular effort when in fact those homes and senior centers should have staff who have been trained to be able to provide this service. And so this is a way for us to be proactive and to make sure that we are using our public safety dollars in a way that makes sense. And I have my fine team here that will be able to provide additional information. Thank you so much for showing up today. Please introduce yourself. And
Excuse me, I need to read the title still.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I'm moving on. Thanks, sorry.
171, authorize Portland Fire and Rescue to charge a fee for service for cost recovery of non-emergent lift assist responses to Oregon State licensed commercial assisted living, residential care, and nursing facilities within the city.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Ditto what I just said.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Ryan Gillespie. I'm the interim fire chief for Portland Fire and Rescue. To my left is, do you want to introduce yourself? Go ahead.
Sure. My name is Sarah Boone, now the Division Chief of Medical Services and Training.
And my name is Greg Espinoza. I'm the Deputy Chief of Medical Services and Training Division.
And thank you, Madam President, Commissioner Fritz, Commissioner Hardesty, and Commissioner Fish for allowing us here to discuss this ordinance. And Commissioner Hardesty, I do want to thank you for pulling this from the consent agenda to give this opportunity for us to speak to it, and as well as to encourage any open conversation or questions that the council or anyone else may have. So as Commissioner Hardesty said, we are here to discuss this ordinance to enact a fee-for-service cost recovery for lift assist calls, non-emergent lift assist calls at Oregon State licensed residential care facilities, assisted living facilities, and nursing facilities. This morning, I'm going to talk just quickly about why. Why are we doing this? Commissioner Hardesty did address most of that in her statement, and I will just I will add to that a little bit. Portland Fire and Rescue, our calls for service have been increasing over the years. We are almost at 90,000 calls a year that Portland Fire and Rescue responds to within the city of Portland. Our mission is to be good stewards of the public's money. We want to increase our efficiency in all aspects of our operations, and so we consistently look to see how we can improve that efficiency and how we can be best stewards of the public money. We are working with the Bureau of Emergency Communications to change our dispatch protocols, to change how we respond to calls and who responds to calls. While that process is going on, we are also looking internally to see what we can change. Our calls range from high acuity, imminent emergency type calls such as a cardiac arrest down to lower acuity calls which do not require immediate assistance, and that is what we're working towards, is to make sure we get the right resources to those types of calls. These calls that we're talking about today are on the low end of the scale, low acuity, so I want to be very clear that we are not looking to charge a fee for a emergency medical service call. This fee is for a non-emergency lift only to a bed or to a chair in an Oregon State licensed facility. So again, we're not talking about emergency medical calls. These are the lift calls only. And it's also important to note that this only pertains to those facilities. So we do not want to be charging individual residences, independent living. That is not the intent of this. The reason why we are looking at the licensed facilities is because through their licensure and their requirements for their clients, they need to provide an appropriate level of service for those clients who have differing medical needs. Within those needs are mobility needs, and so they have clients that are unable, when they fall, they're unable to get up. That should be part of their the needs that they provide for those for their clients. The way that we are operating now, we are subsidizing those businesses by providing that those lift assists by using our public money to do that. We feel that those facilities should provide equipment, training, and proper number of personnel to provide the appropriate service to their clients. One of the concerns with this is that those that work at the facilities will be hesitant to call 911 because they do not want to incur this fee for service. We are being very clear on this, and we will be sending a letter to the facilities explaining this, that if there is any medical need whatsoever, absolutely call 911 and call for the resources. When we arrive on scene to one of these calls, we do an initial assessment, initial patient assessment, which really starts with the simple question of, are you hurt? Do you have any pain? Do you have any injuries? If their answer is no, I am fine, I just need to get back up to the bed, those are the types of calls that we're referring to with this ordinance. If their answer is, my ankle hurts, I'm dizzy, my head hurts. If there's any medical complaint whatsoever, we will go down our EMS protocols. We will do a full patient assessment. Those calls will not qualify for fee recovery. It is purely the lift assist calls. There are other jurisdictions that have enacted fees such as this. I worked closely with an assistant chief from Omaha, Nebraska, who recently enacted a similar ordinance in their jurisdiction. Clackamas County Fire District 1 has adopted a fee recovery for lift assist calls. Kansas City, Missouri, and Tacoma, Washington, also in January of this year, implemented a similar policy for recovery of lift assist fees. Again, I'll conclude here, but I just want to be perfectly clear that this is purely for non-emergent lift assist only in the state licensed assisted living facilities, residential care and nursing facilities. We do not intend nor will we reduce our emergency response to those individuals who need our help.
I have some questions.
Commissioner Fish?
So, Commissioner Hardaway, thank you for putting this on the regular agenda so we can have this very important conversation. Let me kick things off with 3 questions. First, how many bills do you anticipate sending out in year 1 under this pilot?
So our call volume for these type of calls for fiscal year 2017-18 was 345. We anticipate that those may drop because of the recovery of the fee for service. The $500 that we are asking to implement for the fee, we expect that this will encourage these facilities to adequately train, equip, and staff their facilities. So, Commissioner Fish, to answer your question, I expect it will be less than 350, although we don't have our final numbers for fiscal year 18-19 yet, and they do continue to rise.
Thank you. How did you set the $500 fee?
So our finance folks looked at what is an actual cost of a fire response call, and the math that they used was we looked at our total number of calls and our total budget, and that equation equaled approximately $1,050 per incident that Portland Fire responds on. The $500 was set based on industry standard. I worked with the assistant chief in Omaha. Tacoma does a sliding scale where the first call is $350, second call is $500, the third call is $850. The $500 is also consistent with our fire marshal's office fees for standby equipment. So if you needed a fire engine to stand by with 4 personnel for 1 hour, that fee would be $500. So that's how I landed on the $500.
Thank you. And my third question is, do you have the existing resources to implement this program, to bill and do the collections, or will you be asking for some kind of assistance from the city?
We have the resources to do this. So the workflow has been set up. These calls, when they are tracked in our incident system from our responding companies, our EMS battalion chief will review each one of these calls. That individual is going to get an automatic email. They already do get an automatic email notification that a lift assist occurred at a facility. EMS battalion chief will cross-reference that address with the state licensing website to make sure that this facility actually is a state licensed facility and is applicable for this cost recovery. That then will go to our accounting group, and we have set that up so our accounting group is able to send out an invoice to the facility. So to answer your question, no, we will not be asking for more money to implement this program.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Fritz?
Thank you very much. Are you going to be, did you say you're going to be sending notice to all of the facilities to let them know this is going into effect?
Yes, Commissioner, we will. So that letter's being drafted. We wanted to have this opportunity today to present to the council and allow for a dialogue with this, and so that letter will be sent to all of those facilities.
Could you please consider putting something into that letter, giving the employees at the facility a hotline or something to call at the county? I'm very concerned that nursing homes tend to be understaffed anyway, and they tend to be staffed with people like me who are, in nursing, who are not necessarily, if they don't have the equipment, the physical equipment that can assist in a lift, that it could be people who are less trained, not only less trained, but less physically capable of lifting some of these people. And I would want to make sure that those workers in the facilities have somewhere. I mean, obviously, they're going to be able to get workers' comp after their back is bust. But on the other hand, that back is going to be bust for the rest of their lives.
Right, right. So a resource, just so I understand, resource for the staff to be able to call to get some help on resources available.
Just to let them know that, if they feel that what they're being asked to do now is beyond their physical capabilities, here's a confidential hotline. I would imagine that Multnomah County's health services has such a thing that healthcare workers can anonymously report when they feel that they're being asked to do things that are just
okay, as I understand. Absolutely.
If you could just look into it, I'd appreciate that.
Absolutely, and we do want to work with these facilities and help them be able to accomplish this. So we have in the past, I didn't mention this, of the almost 100 facilities within the city of Portland, it's really a handful that are utilizing our services over and over. And like Tremaine Clayton, our high utilizer chat personnel works with individuals. Our EMS battalion chief has been working with these high utilizer facilities for outreach and education. And so we definitely want to work with them and let them know of the equipment that's available and assist them so that they can properly do their job.
Thank you. Yeah, to be clear, I'm absolutely supportive of this. Okay. Another thought occurs to me that hopefully many of these employees are members of Service Employees International Union, so perhaps giving them the contact information for their union if they're in one as part of this letter, and requiring the facility operators to give out that information. Okay. If you could just look at that, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm curious, what kind of pushback have you had from the industry?
I had a conversation this morning with the gentleman that's here today, who I believe he's going to speak for that side, for the industry side, and so I will let that individual speak from their side.
Have you received other feedback from?
No, Commissioner, I have not. So again, I'm falling back to the Assistant Chief Kathy Bossman that I worked with from Omaha. I worked closely with her and their proposal that they put together, their ordinance, and they received very little. She had one phone call from a concerned business, and so, quite frankly, I wasn't expecting a lot of pushback on this because we really do see it as a extension of their business and services that they should be providing.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. You said something that triggered a thought. So this is only going to apply to Oregon State licensed commercial assisted living facilities. It will not apply to individuals living in private homes or independent living. However, I think it's safe to say that there are facilities operating without a license that are not private residences. What would happen in that event? Because you said that you were going to, that you make sure that it's licensed
right
before sending the bill. So what happens in that event?
That's an excellent question. So for the billing purposes, we'll cross-reference with the state licensing facility because that's going to be the criteria for us to bill. Your question leads to the other side, though, and we want to make sure that that people are protected and that are living in facilities that are licensed correctly. And so I can look further into how we can interact with the state on that and their licensing ability to make sure that if there are under the radar facilities operating, that we can make sure that those people are taken care of. So I'll look further into that.
Thank you. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you. Do you traditionally come across unlicensed nursing facilities?
We don't. It's not something that we generally check for. So to be honest with you, it's not. We're not there as a enforcement or licensing check. Right. So our main concern is the residents' health and well-being. We do, when we encounter, whether it's a business, whether it's a facility or a private residence, when we find people that are living in conditions that are not healthy, or unsanitary, right. We do work with the county on that and make referrals to make sure that those people have resources sent to them. But as far as the specific licensing, it's not something that we look for.
No, that was actually what I wanted to get on the record, because I was pretty sure if you went into an unsafe environment, you would make sure to connect with folks who had the regulatory authority to make sure that they were addressed.
Yes,
Thank
absolutely.
You.
Yes, thank you. All right, again, we probably didn't have a sign-up sheet, so is there anyone here that would, yep, thank you, you can return to your seats.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here who would like to give testimony on this item? Please come forward. I see 3 people, Mr. Lightning, Mr. Johnson, and
Mr. Carlson.
Mr. Carlson. All right, the list is closed, and Mr. Carlson, please begin.
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify before you this morning.
Oh, and please read
Jim
your name
Carlson,
into the record.
President of the Oregon Healthcare Association. We're a not-for-profit association that represents about 700 licensed care providers across the state and approximately 100 here within the city of Portland that serve approximately 6,000 individuals each and every day in the city that require long-term care services and supports. I also want to thank Mr. Gillespie, Chief Gillespie, and the Portland Fire and Rescue folks for the important work they do each and every day. I don't really believe we're at cross purposes here, but I think we have some thoughts about how we might be able to come up with a better ordinance to really address what you're trying to get after. The people who require these services are older, disabled, disproportionately low income. Many of them, if not most of them in the city, rely on Medicaid to help pay for the services that they need. Most have complex medical needs, functional limitations, cognitive impairments, age-related dementia, and the others. So it's a very challenging set of individuals to care for. I appreciate Commissioner Fritz's comments about caregivers. Caregiving is very difficult and demanding, yet very important work. It's a disproportionately female workforce, and oftentimes when you are dealing with individuals who've fallen in the middle of the night and these types of things, they are women who are the caregivers. Generally what happens in these cases is that caregiver is trained to put a call in either to the on-call nurse or to the physician. Oftentimes they are then being directed by the nurse or by the physician to keep the person stable, not to move them until there's a determination if they're okay or not. Oftentimes the nurse or the physician is the one directing the EMS call and is directing that they want to see them transported. Oftentimes, by the time EMS actually arrives on scene and they're there, that individual may have been on the floor for 35, 45 minutes. Sometimes they just want to get up and go back to bed. But it's very difficult and difficult to determine whether that individual's broken a hip, fractured their back, suffered a serious injury or not. In assisted living and residential care facilities, which are the largest number of the facilities we're talking about, people use the term nursing facility generically. Most of what we are talking about here are residential care facilities and assisted living facilities. you're dealing with unlicensed, untrained caregivers to a large extent. These are not people who are RNs and LPNs or even CNAs. And so it's very difficult for them. Our primary concern with the ordinance as drafted specifically is that it's going to create a disincentive for these caregivers to make the call due to the hefty fines. The impact statement from Portland Fire and Rescue on page 1, paragraph 6, actually says that it will disincentivize this. And as Chief Gillespie's testimony indicated, I think that's the intent.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Carlson, don't you believe that there should be trained staff to deal with issues that are consistently arising in these care facilities?
Commissioner Hardesty, they are trained, and what they're trained to do is to call that nurse or to call that physician in this situation, and then to follow physician orders or nurse orders. And they oftentimes, we have a home and community-based system in Oregon. We do not put people in institutions, medical facilities, and so we do not have doctors and physicians on site round the clock.
But excuse me, we are not talking about home visits. We are not talking about people who are staying with family members. We are talking about licensed facilities that are supposed to be appropriately staffed so that they can take care of the people under their care. That's what they're being paid to provide. So maybe I'm just not understanding what you're saying, that the issue is, if it's a licensed facility that is charged with caring for people who are elderly and disabled, then they should have the appropriate staff. Do you not agree with that?
I absolutely 100% agree, and we've got very good, strong state rules and regulations requiring that appropriate staff. Generally, what we're seeing in these situations is more what Commissioner Fritz was referring to, where they are trying to basically ascertain whether this individual needs to be transported in an emergency situation or not. And,
So,
and that's
Carlson,
not something that they have the capability of making a determination of every time.
So my final question, Mr. Carlson, because I don't think that we're far off. I think we both want good quality care for people who are in facilities that are supposed to provide that service. I think what our challenge is whether or not using public safety resources over and over and over again at the same facilities to lift people who don't require any additional medical assistance. Do you think it's appropriate that we're using public safety dollars at a very limited number of facilities that, in fact, are just calling to help lift someone off the ground? Do you think that's appropriate?
So, Commissioner Hardesty, if it was exactly as you described, I would say no. But I think it's not quite that simple, because I think oftentimes the caregivers are trying to make a determination whether this individual needs to be transported or not. In a situation narrowly of a lift and lift only, I would agree with you wholeheartedly. What I would like to say is there are some other ordinances that we would like to steer you towards to look at. The City of Redmond, Oregon, and Central Oregon has had an approach here that we believe is one that's very good, where they look at this on inappropriate EMS utilization more broadly, and there's a bit more of what we would call a sliding scale, as Chief Gillespie referred to. A second one is in Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue. Our organization's been engaged with them for over 8 years on a collaborative. We're doing a joint training next week, and they've driven down the numbers dramatically of these kinds of situations. And I believe that we can, if we want to work on this ordinance a little bit more, get it just right and make sure we're serving people and making sure we're meeting the needs of people.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fritz?
Mr. Carlson, thank you for being here today. This is really interesting. Does the size of the facility, the number of beds, make a difference? Does there tend to be a licensed caregiver on site in the larger ones?
Yeah, so Commissioner Fritz, you've got very different licensure requirements, first off, between a nursing facility where they do have round-the-clock nursing and very robust staffing ratios versus what you see in oftentimes very small residential care facilities. And so absolutely, the size does matter. You can have a residential care facility as small as 6 beds.
So
And Commissioner Hardesty, I really appreciate you bringing this. I know that Commissioner Novick worked on this, Commissioner Saltzman worked on this, so it's really great to be having a public hearing about it. And since it's a non-emergency ordinance, we do have some time to look into some more details. I think you're raising a good point in that it's not only the lift, it's the assessment that is necessary. And so in some of the larger facilities where there is a licensed medical provider on site, they can do. That might be a place to triage it, as we say.
I think there's options here, and I think there's a lot that can be done by working collaboratively with Portland Fire and Rescue and caregivers and care providers. One last point, just on Commissioner Udaley's comments. I think what you were referring to possibly, Commissioner, is adult foster care homes are not included in the ordinance, and there are hundreds of those in the city. They are licensed in Multnomah County by the county. In the rest of the state, they're licensed by the state. And the ordinance does not address those settings, but they are licensed, but they are under Multnomah County's auspices. And they are outside the ordinance.
I was referring to just unlicensed facilities, but thank you for that clarification. And thanks for being here, because this is a complicated issue. I am a caregiver. I have a son who requires full assistance with all daily needs, and I lift and transfer him almost every day. I just spent 16 days in the hospital with him, where we had someone at his bedside 24 hours a day because he's not capable of calling for help or communicating with staff without assistance. I injured myself in the first few days because of just the different kind of mechanics required of handling him in the hospital, and finally had to relinquish that duty to the hospital staff. They have ceiling-mounted lifts that are electric, and I'm really hoping to have one myself one day. As a parent and someone who is really striving to keep my son out of care facilities because of concerns for safety and health, my instinct is to kind of condemn the facilities, but your testimony has helped me understand better some of the challenges. And I think the biggest issue on the facility side is these smaller facilities simply don't have staff who are able to make that call. That being said, I don't necessarily agree that we should be sending out EMS to make the lifts. I know these centers are underfunded, the providers are understaffed and underpaid. I have a lot of sympathy, but it seems to me that there has to be greater attention paid to who can actually safely stay in facilities like this and who needs to live in a facility with on-site medical staff. My question for the Bureau and Commissioner Hardesty is, I know in the past I've had conversations with the Bureau about the fact that we send out the big trucks for every call, and that's not an efficient use of those resources. And could we come up with a response that is less resource intensive and costs us less? So I have a lot more questions than I thought I would. But it's a really important conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
If I could,
Mr.
Carlson, let me just offer a perspective. I, for 10 years in New York City, represented healthcare workers in a variety of settings, and one of the chronic problems in the larger healthcare system of New York and surrounding jurisdictions was understaffing of care facilities. And it manifests itself in a number of ways, and one was an explosion in the number of people charged with patient abuse and neglect, which really shifts to the frontline worker the burden of not being able to meet the requirements and demands of the job that should be addressed by management and through adequate staffing. And I think at some point they had some preposterous number of people on a hotline that had been reported for abuse and neglect that it got up to about 1 million different referrals. So it was skewed because there was inadequate resources to deal, and so that was my perspective. Here, as you know, the city is very focused on cost recovery. Our costs are going up, our revenues aren't keeping pace. We have to find a way to stick to our core mission, and we have to be able to also have rational cost recovery models. Commissioner Hardesty and the Bureau argue this is a fee for service. I was struck by the fact that you referred to it as a fine. And frankly, I'm not sure that's very helpful in terms of having a collaborative discussion if you begin with the view that it's a fine. A fine is a punitive action taken, because someone violates a rule. I think the Bureau deserves more credit than that. I think they've outlined this as part of cost recovery and as a reasonable fee for service. Would you care to respond to that?
Yeah, Commissioner Fish, I did not mean to impugn anyone whatsoever in my comments, and so please excuse me for using that language. What I would say is these situations are not clear situations at the time an EMS call is made, and always after the fact, you can look back and say that was an appropriate EMS call or that was an inappropriate EMS call. We do not want to create disincentives for caregivers to call people in emergency situations. And that's what I think is at the crux of how we deal with this. And I think there's a proper way to deal with it where it doesn't feel punitive after the fact if that caregiver made a mistake in making that call.
Well, as someone mentioned earlier, this is the first reading of a non-emergency. You've said that Tualatin and I think Redmond,
City of Redmond,
had other things. This will come back for further discussion and a vote. If you felt that some other jurisdiction had a refinement that you wanted us to consider, it's hard to have this as an abstract conversation. I mean, I appreciate you being here. Your testimony has been very clear, but frankly, it's the way for those of us who are not directly responsible for the Bureau to respond to your concerns is to see a marked up copy of the ordinance with an example of what are you getting at in terms of a scaled process or a data-driven process. My sense is that sometimes it's useful to launch programs and call them pilots, then gain information and then make the adjustments as they go along. I'm sure that's what the Bureau will do here as they test drive it. Yes. But if you believe that there is some change we should be considering at the front end that's drawn from the experience of other jurisdictions, I would urge you to, as quickly as possible, get in a marked up ordinance so that those of us who aren't as close to the issue as the commissioner in charge can understand what you're getting at.
Thank you, Commissioner Fish. I apologize. We just learned of the ordinance yesterday, and Commissioner Hardesty and her staff were extremely responsive to us in a very short time window yesterday just to give us an opportunity to even speak before you today. So I much appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I would just add to this good conversation, I hope that over the next week or however long it takes to bring this back, that we'll also involve SEIU to speak for the workers there as well. Because I think that this is a really good conversation. I feel also that, we at the city we do fire services and emergency medical services. We're not the care providers in the residential facilities. Yes. And so consulting with Multnomah County and other counties would be helpful as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that perspective.
Really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
All right. Mr. Lightning?
It's up to you, yes. My name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Superhumanity. One of the terms, are we willing to subsidize the senior citizens, the disabled, and to really make sure that we're providing a service that in the event that they do take a fall, maybe they're the ones that made the phone call. We want to make sure that everyone's going to show up at that time. Because when you're dealing with somebody taking a fall, there can be so many things that can happen from that point. And if you don't have the right people to go in there and do the patient assessment, and maybe this individual called themselves, we need to be there.
Excuse me, Lightning. This really has absolutely nothing to do with an individual at a home who falls.
No, I'm talking a licensed facility. If they fall and they happen to have a cell phone near them, they're the ones making the call. I need help immediately.
I see.
Help me, please. There's not anyone here.
Right. Okay.
So again, thank you. Again, from my position, we had 345 calls. If you calculate that out at the 500, that's 172,500. I myself would never take the chance of the patient's well-being for that small a number. If I can have the properly trained fire department with the right equipment, with well-trained people, physically fit, on hand, ready to assist, and if somebody says, I'm sorry for the call that was made, we apologize. I want them there immediately. And where I'm at is I think we need to, on these facilities, is to really have a get-together town hall meeting, sit down with them and say, this is the problem. We're talking 172,500 of subsidies that we feel we're giving you right now. Now, how can you help us from your side? More training, more people. What do you need us as a city to do for you? Because we don't want to stop showing up at these facilities till we have that in order, till we know they're going to be taken care of properly. We will not chance this patient's safety for 172,500 across the board to all these facilities and 345 calls. We will not take that chance, period. But we want to know how you're going to help us maybe reduce that total number that we might have to spend, how you might reduce those calls and work with us to implement a plan for the safety of the patients. That's our major concern, period. We will not make this change till we have a clear plan from you on what you want us to do to assist you and your patients. Thank you.
Thank you.
Touchy
Mr. Johnson.
subject here.
Good morning, Madam President, Commissioners. My name is Charles Bridgecrane Johnson. Once upon a time, before there was Commissioner Hardesty, there was just Joanne Hardesty. She and Chloe, I don't think I ever had the opportunity, but Nancy Wigmore has testified here, been on the big screen and all that. She now lives in the Oddfellows home. I would assume this would apply to her. But I'm really sad about the homeless people under bridges and schools because they don't have a professional trade association lobbyist to come in and talk for them. And that's actually what's happening here. It's some very highly paid, well-compensated owner-operators of homes have sent their talking head to say, oh my God, you're killing me with the $500. That's really what's happening here. We can pass this ordinance right now, and the worst thing that will happen is there might maybe be a $500 ding multiple times to the least staffed small 6-bed homes. Wonderful. Do it. They'll find the money. You know what might even be the actual case? This might be billable and coverable under the Oregon Health Plan. So if somebody just needed a lift but no other services and they're so obese or disabled, it might not even ding the owners. They might just pass it on to the insurance company. So just do this. Stop subsidizing the private owners, the corporations that run these facilities. They're not all big super corporations. Maybe some are small. The gentleman testifying, Mr. Carlson, has said some are only 6-bed. We're only talking about $500 per click. We have bigger issues that need to eat up your time and your due deliberation. Pass it. If it's horribly burdensome, I guarantee you they'll come running and screaming about the $500 pain you inflicted on them. But you know what's actually going to happen? Nothing. This will easily fit within every one of their business models at a $500 per cost incident. The actual real things you should be looking about amending into this ordinance is every time it happens, you should be copying a copy of that bill should go to Multnomah County Aging and Disability and to the Oregon Health Administration so that we can be 100% sure that where these calls are happening are actually licensed facilities or people with vetted backgrounds taking money from disabled people to provide care. That is more important. I believe Mr. Carlson said he is with the Oregon Healthcare Association. The purpose of the Healthcare Association is not just quality of care, it's profit and income for the owners of healthcare facilities. Your job is the patients. As Commissioner Fish has pointed out, we can run a pilot program. We learn from this. They didn't even come with a single paragraph marked in red to say, no, this will kill us. You can pass this right now. If all 4 of you vote aye, and then next week all 4 of you or 5 of you vote aye again, the world will not end. Maybe a small business owner will contact you about needing some relief. Thank you very much for your time, everyone.
Thank you. I would just like to add that we might think of a fall as an inconsequential event, but falls are actually the leading cause of injury death among adults age 65 and older. And Oregon actually has a much higher than average fall-related death rate. So this isn't a minor thing, and I really appreciate the conversation. And I have to disagree with Mr. Johnson. The worst case scenario is someone doesn't get the medical assistance that they need, or a care provider is injured trying to do something they feel pressured to do because of a cost to the employer. So it's a complicated issue, and I look forward to further conversation. This is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading. Carla, please read item 182.
Amend timeline for placard requirement and tenant notification for unreinforced masonry buildings and required documentation of compliance.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Commissioner. As you know, we had public testimony last week. I believe this is our second reading. The goal of this ordinance is to delay, not repeal, I'll say that again, delay the implementation of the placarding requirement around unenforced masonry buildings. I plan to do my due diligence by speaking with as many impacted communities. I know that the Bureau of Emergency Management is preparing to put a task force in place to look at the systemic upgrades that are absolutely critical in order for us to make sure that the buildings, the brick buildings in the city of Portland are safe. And that process has started. And so it's my goal to come back to this city council long before November of 2020 with a fully fleshed out proposal that actually implement this in a way that provides financial assistance for some of those who need it, as well as to make sure that we've done our due diligence to notify those most impacted by the requirement to upgrade buildings. Again, last week we had a lot of testimony from people who were very concerned about the requirement that they do an encumbrance on their title at Multnomah County. They were also concerned about whether or not they would lose value by putting a placard on their buildings. They also expressed a lot of concerns about just not feeling like they were notified well in advance. And so we're taking all that information into consideration. And today I hope that my colleagues will support this as we start the work of making sure that we implement this appropriately.
Will you yield for a second?
I will absolutely do that.
You know, the mayor is not here today, and I won't speak for him in terms of where he would land on this ordinance, but I do want to acknowledge that in the conversation we had last week, he publicly announced that he felt the encumbrance was a bad idea. And in retrospect, whether it's a lien on the title or not, and there's healthy debate about that, he concluded that he made it clear that he supported that aspect of the legislation that we're taking up. So I want to put that on the record.
Thank you, Commissioner Fish. You're right, and I've been in conversations with the mayor in the hopes that, and he said he's looking forward to supporting whatever we come up with, and so I hope we're able to come back with a proposal that we can get all the city council to get behind. Again, this is really not an effort to stymie what we all believe is good public policy, but to make sure we do it in a way that is respectful and inclusive of all the folks that are most impacted by it. Thank you.
Any other comments or deliberations? Well, I'll just say that...
Are we going to take a vote?
Are we going to vote now?
If we're taking a vote, then we can make our comments as part of the record?
But you are currently the chairwoman. You can do what you want.
Yes, and I suppose I had a few things to say that people might want to respond to, but
Okay.
I can save them for my vote.
No, you're the chair. Just
Since I wasn't here last week, I'd love to hear your comments, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't here either. So I was going to say, I want to say I was sorry that I missed the hearing last week, but that would not be true. Because this has been one of the most frustrating, fruitless conversations that I've had in my last 2+ years on City Council. Despite people feeling like they weren't given adequate notice, it's a conversation that's been going on for a very, very long time. And we have yet to achieve clarity. But we really need to, because this is part of a much bigger conversation around public safety and resiliency in the event of a major earthquake, which we know could happen at any moment. So I guess the few things I want to put out there. One, while I do think that we got off on a bad foot with the public prior to my arrival on City Council and obviously Commissioner Hardesty's, I want to commend staff for all the work that they've done on this. It's been a really difficult process. There are no easy answers because it is such a complex issue. And this is really not about the quality of the work the staff has done. I do think we need to do a better job communicating with the public, but the staff work was really excellent. So I want to thank PBEM, BDS, Prosper, and other staff members who have contributed to this effort. As I kind of referenced before, I don't know where URM buildings sit in the hierarchy of priorities that we need to consider when we talk about preparation and resiliency. I, for one, am very concerned how we're going to deal with the threat of the fuel tanks on the west side of the river north of downtown Portland. Many people think that the river will become our primary mode of transportation after an earthquake, and I regret to inform them that the river will be full of dangerous debris and it will probably be on fire. So you are not going to be traveling by boat. I'd finally like to say, and then open it up for responses or comments from my colleagues, because I wasn't here to hear all the testimony last week, that there really has not been a hidden agenda here, and I've been very disappointed by some of the misinformation being spread by opponents to our work on URMs, whether it's retrofits to the buildings or the placarding. I strongly believe that residents, whether they're commercial or residential residents, have a right to know that they're living in a building that is not up to current safety standards. I have yet to hear a compelling argument against that. I've pointed out many times that half of our schools are URMs and don't meet current safety standards. This is common public knowledge, yet people still send their students to school. So I do feel like we're having kind of a somewhat of a Chicken Little moment with this conversation, but I actually encouraged and supported Commissioner Hardesty's decision to delay the placarding requirement. We need to get together on this conversation as a community because it is going to impact all of us. And if we don't, council is not the only one to blame. I'll just leave it at that. Commissioner Fritz, did you have any?
I get to vote first, so I'll just make my speech then.
Okay, all right. So, no further comments. This is Carla, please, this is a second reading, so we're not taking testimony again. Carla, please call the roll.
Fritz.
Well, I appreciate Commissioner Hardesty doing the actual code change to delay implementation of what was decided last year. I was very disappointed that it came to council last week when I had a an absence that was scheduled. Well, my absence was filed last year, but my mother's birthday was filed 89 years ago. So, and then especially when Commissioner Hardesty was not able, Commissioner Udaley was not able to be part of the conversation. This is something that the council has been engaged in. This is my 11th year on the council, and Jonna Papa Eflimu has been working on it ever since I got here. So I would second Commissioner Udaley's commendations to staff and all of your diligence. You've taken the brunt of it and dealt with it extremely well. As public servants, it's our first responsibility to inform Portland community members of any information that might impact their health and safety, and to do what we can to ameliorate those risks. And as I stated when I supported the ordinance last October, I view the placarding requirement as a way to build public awareness of the issue and support for solutions. Instead, as Commissioner Udaley has alluded to, there's been an absolute disgusting amount of misinformation that has been spread in the community. Even the stating that there's an encumbrance on the title. No, there was a requirement to tell future tenants on the title that, in other words, to keep the placarding in place. That's all. That's all that was required. It's not like we were requiring the upgrades, that we were requiring anything else. And that was all that was required, and I thought that was fairly minimal. A study in Seattle has shown that placarding by itself, well, it's hard to even assess the impact of placarding by itself because most other jurisdictions have required upgrades. And even a study in Seattle pointed out that that their council has already heard the same kinds of discussions that we have, but they pointed out that demolition of old buildings will disproportionately impact communities of colour and low-income people, yet these communities are the very communities that are most likely to be hit the hardest in terms of life safety, personal injury and displacement when an earthquake strikes, because it's not if, it's when. And so I think it's really unfortunate and failing our communities that have the least resources to say that we're not even going to tell them that they're living in these buildings or working in these buildings or walking past these buildings that will almost certainly collapse in the event of not only the big earthquake, but even a 5 or 6. There's been many different places that have experienced deaths from people walking past or being in these buildings, and I think that at the very least, we could let people know that they are at risk. The new ordinance does require new leases to disclose that information. We can't change the contract of previously signed leases. At this point, we're not even requiring notification or having any mechanism to notify tenants, whether business or residential, that they're living in these buildings. So I hope that in the process, as you move forward, Commissioner Hardesty, you will look at, if the landlords can't or won't do it, that the city would notify these residents that they are living in hazardous places. I do support removing the recording requirement, particularly since it was so messaged as far as what it was, but requiring direct notification of compliance with the Bureau of Development Services if and when it happens. I hope that all of our city buildings now have these placards in place. If they're not, I call upon each of my colleagues to make sure that the bureaus within their jurisdictions will post these placards. I think it'll be really interesting to see whether people stop attending Keller Auditorium if there's a placard posted. Similarly, if they stop using the Water Bureau buildings that will have the placards posted. It's our responsibility to do something about it. I do recognize that we also need to engage building owners and users in the ongoing process. I don't think that that necessarily meant that we shouldn't have placarded in the meantime. I think that would have continued to build awareness because now, once again, it's kicking the can down the road. And I appreciate that Commissioner Hardesty is saying we're not kicking it very far down the road. To me, 2020 still seems a long way away. And so I hope that we will have an outcome at the legislature this session where we were looking to set up a grant fund, not a tax abatement, because both government and non-profits such as churches, that doesn't benefit from a tax abatement. But we do need a grant fund, like Commissioner Udaley alluded to. Which of these buildings really are worth investing in improving, and which ones perhaps are at the end of their useful life? I hope that we're going to fund the Historic Resources Inventory, which has been delayed for many years in the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, whether it's by allocating an additional amount of money to that work or have it requesting that the commissioner in charge redirect resources within the Bureau of Planning Sustainability to do that work, and also development services. It's important for us to figure out which of these buildings are really historic, worthwhile, and needed, and which ones, while it would be expensive to demolish them and help with rebuilding, at least they would have the mandatory inclusionary housing. At least they would then be safe for another 100 years or beyond. And so I believe it's our civic duty to continue working on this, and that we can't keep ignoring this problem. And I'm just concerned that by not doing this placarding, we are delaying resolution of a problem that has gone on for far too long. No.
Fish.
Let me begin by thanking Commissioner Hardesty for bringing this forward and for structuring what I think has been a very productive and fruitful conversation. I would note that if we were keeping score last week, I think the overwhelming sentiment was repeal, not delay. That is not what you're proposing, and you have not changed the course that you laid for us, and I think that's worth noting. I think that puts it in context. I'm also pleased that my colleagues are separating out the passions of the moment and the passions of some of the advocates on this issue, frankly, some of the over-the-top rhetoric of some of the people we've heard from, and separating that out from the good work that staff has done. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that we don't turn to staff to make the policy calls, we make them. Yes. And we sometimes modify our positions or reverse course or other things. That is not a reflection on staff. The problem with this issue has not been a problem of the quality of the staffing that we've received, and I will say that publicly and privately in every possible setting, because I think there were some moments of awkwardness last week where, frankly, some of the people testifying went off message and appeared to be attacking staff. That's dealing from the bottom of the deck. Attack the people that are elected to make the decisions. Don't attack the people that are assigned to do the work. Unless you think they're incompetent, in which case you have a right to make that claim. And no one said anyone was incompetent. So I'm pleased that we can separate out the issues of the policy questions from the staffing. I gave a fairly comprehensive statement last week about where I land on this, but I just want to highlight a couple of things around my goals. Number one, I'd like to see a comprehensive solution. There isn't anybody that disagrees that there is a risk posed to this community by future earthquakes. The question in my mind, and the central question, is can we structure a system of grants and incentives to protect as many of the vulnerable URM buildings as possible while also protecting public safety? And for me, that's the question. And what has been clear to me lately is there's more work to be done to try to build a durable consensus to move this forward. So I believe taking a timeout now in a reasonable delay to seek a broader consensus is exactly what we should be trying to do around a contentious issue. And frankly, given who we've heard from in the faith community, the small business owners, the mom and pop landlords, the historic property developers, the music venues, and others, we have a big stake in getting this right, because the unintended consequences of our otherwise laudable action could have disastrous consequences to people that own buildings, which we all agree add a lot to the character of our community, and we want to preserve at all reasonable costs. Finally, it is my view, to beat an old cliche, that we put the cart before the horse. I did not vote on this placarding requirement in November. I think a reasonable delay to seek the broader consensus makes sense. It will give us a chance to see whether the legislature acts on proposals for grants and incentives. It will give us a chance to look to see what kind of city resources can be made available. I think that's laudable. And what we are doing, in effect, is responding to a fairly broad-based set of anxiety out in the community that we're moving forward before really figuring this out. And I think of all the various options that Commissioner Hardesty was presented with, the most reasonable one was to exempt all buildings from a requirement until November 20th other than city buildings. I think that gives us the opportunity to do it right, but this is not a repeal. this is a delay. And if consensus can't be reached, then the council is going to have to act in any regard. So thank you for what I think has been a very useful conversation, and I vote aye.
Hardesty?
I want to thank all my colleagues. I'm so sorry that Commissioner Fritz and Commissioner Udaley were not able to hear the public testimony. But I can assure you, and I'm sure you've heard from many of the public who have expressed concerns about the implementation of this ordinance. I learned so much more than I ever wanted to know about unenforced masonry buildings in the last few weeks. And I really want to compliment Amit Kumar, who's a structural engineer in the Bureau of Developmental Services, for taking the time and really educating me about both how the list was developed, because a lot of the testimony I heard was that there was a drive-by list development at the public hearing last week. And so I do understand that there was a long process that took place, that there was an initial development of the list of the URM buildings, unreinforced masonry buildings, and that there was due diligence to go and double check and triple check to ensure that that list was in fact the right list and included the right buildings. Were there still buildings on the list that the Bureau of Developmental Services didn't know should have been taken off? Yes, there were, but there are certainly processes in place that allow building owners who don't believe that their building should be listed to have their buildings removed if in fact we find out that they should not have been on the list. It is absolutely amazing to me the amount of calories that we have put into this particular issue, but we are committed to putting more calories into it, because for me, it is important that we do this right, not that we do it fast, not that we do it so that we're just using a hammer to force people into compliance. So where are we going from here? Where we're going is that the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management will be putting together a task force. I've talked to Oregon OMF. What does OMF stand for?
Office of Management and Finance.
Thank you so much. Office of Management and Finance to put together a work group to look at financial options. As Commissioner Fritz has said, the legislature will be considering a bill to help owners be able to pay for the improvements that we're looking for. But at the end of the day, I want to be very clear. No one wants buildings to fall down and hurt, injure, and kill people in an earthquake. No one wants that to happen. And no action that we're taking is actually to further the demolition of buildings. I've heard some real wild conspiracy theories as I have worked through this process. And I think as a new commissioner who inherits work that has been done in previous years, I felt it was important to do my own due diligence, to educate myself on this issue, to talk to the people that were most impacted by the issue. And though I appreciate the votes that were taken prior to me getting here, I feel I have an obligation to slow the process down and make sure that as we roll it out again, we are rolling it out in a way that actually is a cooperative effort and not a hammer that we're banging people over the head with saying, you got to do this or else. Some of the things that I've heard, like this was a takings and we were trying to put all black churches out of business, and I've heard some really crazy stuff as I've been doing my due diligence around this issue. And anyone that knows me would have to know that I am not going to be a tool for undermining black faith institutions in our community, or arts institutions, or music institutions. Those are institutions that I value greatly, and my plan is to work with those institutions to make sure that we have a more positive outcome. But I want to be clear. At the end of the day, I have an obligation to make sure that Portlanders are safe. I don't expect that what we come back with will have 100% agreement. And I'm not looking for 100% agreement. What I'm looking for is some commonality, some middle ground that actually puts us on a path to making Portland a safer city for all of us. And so I want to be very clear about that. If I waited for 100% agreement, we'd never, ever, ever come back and have this conversation again. I want to absolutely thank the incredible staff at the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management. I want to thank my staff, Derek, who jumped into this feet first when we first got on board. I want to thank the incredible work of the Bureau of Developmental Services, because I know they get beat up an awful lot, and sometimes they're doing great work, but they're doing it under really challenging circumstances. We're going to get this right. We're going to do it in a way that's respectful of people, but at the end of the day, we will make a decision about moving forward. I vote aye.
Udaley.
Well, I'm reminded of one of the most disappointing conversations I had on this subject, which was a property owner telling me that they shouldn't be required to notify their tenants or placard their building because that would put them at a disadvantage to newer buildings. And my response was, you should be at a disadvantage. You are providing substandard housing. Call me nostalgic, but I miss the days in Portland where living in substandard housing came along with paying below market rate rents. Frankly, I think that's how it still should be. My personal experience indicates otherwise, though. I was initially very supportive of both the notification of tenants and the placarding, but after an earlier hearing we had on this item, enough issues were raised by property owners that I felt couldn't be adequately answered and we couldn't get clarity on that. My confidence wavered and I ultimately did not support the ordinance. I want to be clear, like Commissioner Hardesty, we have to prioritize public safety. I absolutely support implementing the notification piece of this ordinance as soon as possible. I also support delaying the placarding until we achieve greater clarity and give property owners a chance to get in compliance. And speaking of compliance, I want to implore those property owners who actually do have the resources to do seismic upgrades to just do it. Don't wait for the city, just do it. There are tax abatements available. There's an excellent program called Property Fit Oregon that is available to, I want to make sure I get this right. Commercial and residential buildings and multifamily with 5 units or more, you could end up with a positive cash flow after debt service if everything goes perfectly. And while many property owners might not realize immediate cost savings or increase in property value, it's ultimately going to pay off. And most importantly, it's going to save lives. With that, I vote aye. The ordinance is passed or adopted rather. Carla, please read item 183.
Authorize a purchase order with Hughes Fire Equipment, Inc. for 4 emergency response apparatus for a not-to-exceed amount of $2,816,210.
Okay, this item has already been heard and testimony was taken last week. Colleagues, is there any further discussion? All right. This is an emergency item. Carla, please call the roll.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Udaley.
Aye. Thank you. The ordinance is adopted. Carla, please read item 184.
Accept $2.4 million grant from the Oregon Department of Transportation and authorize an intergovernmental agreement for the Northeast Halsey Street Bike Ped Transit Improvements Project and appropriate $300,000 in fiscal year 2018-19.
All right, this is my item. I'm pleased to bring this grant acceptance to council for the important bike and pedestrian improvement to outer Northeast Halsey Street. Nicole Pierce from Transportation is here to quickly walk us through the project. Welcome, Nicole. Please state your name for the record.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Udaly, and good morning, Commissioner Fritz, Commissioner Hardesty, and Commissioner Fish. My name is Nicole Pierce. I am the PBOT Capital Project Manager assigned to the Northeast Halsey Safety and Access to Transit Project, which, according to PBOT naming convention, should rightly be known as the Northeast Halsey Street 68th Avenue to 92nd Avenue project. We actually have, yeah, right. But we actually have a lot of projects on Halsey right now, so that title makes it clear which of the many Halsey projects we're actually talking about. So the ordinance before you today is to accept a $2.4 million grant from ODOT and to appropriate $300,000 of that funding in this fiscal year so we can get started on the project right away. The mechanism for granting those funds is an intergovernmental agreement, so the ordinance will also approve that IGA. The project is the result of two planning efforts, the 2009 East Side Max Station Area Communities Report and the 2016 Growing Transit Communities Plan. Both of those planning efforts included extensive public involvement in the form of surveys, open houses, and advisory committees. The project is located in an area that scores high on the PBOT equity matrix, meaning there are higher than average populations of low income, limited English proficiency, and non-white populations. The project has a lot of community support, but I specifically want to mention two organizations. The first is Join, which is a homeless support nonprofit. They're located on Northeast 81st Avenue, just south of Halsey. And the second is the Multnomah County Juvenile Justice Complex, which is located on Northeast 68th Avenue, also south of Halsey. So looking at the map, the Juvenile Justice Complex is south of that westernmost circle, which represents a new crossing to go in at 68th and Halsey. And Join is just south of the new crossing that's shown at the circle in the middle of the map, which is a new crossing proposed at Northeast 80th and Halsey. In addition, TriMet has identified Northeast Halsey through this area for more frequent future transit service on line 77. Northeast Halsey is a designated high crash network street for two of the three modes, that's for walking and driving. The project will also connect pedestrians and cyclists to the new multi-use path that will be built to the east. It's that solid green line shown on the far right side of this map, which will connect Northeast Halsey under I-205 to the Gateway Transit Center and Gateway Green. And one more thing, this project scored highest in the region during the 2016 round of regional flexible funds allocation. So I'm quickly going to go through some highlights of the scope, and I have some concept drawings to share, but I would need you to keep in mind that these are very early concepts and they'll need to be vetted and fleshed out through the design process. So the project is centered on making it easier and safer for people to walk, bike, and roll to and from the 82nd Avenue Max Station. So starting from the west, we're proposing a new crossing at Halsey and 68th. As you can see, there's currently no crossing there, and if you know that area at all, 68th Avenue functions kind of like the end of a freeway off-ramp, so not a very safe spot. We'll be squaring up the intersection of 68th and Halsey, adding a crosswalk and a median island, which should make it a lot safer to cross in that area. We're also proposing new crossings at Northeast Halsey and 80th. Our draft concept, as you can see, shows two new crosswalks with median islands and some sidewalk infill and roundabout. And again, remind you that this is a draft concept. We'll have to see if a roundabout will actually work in this location.
Excuse me, Ms. Pierce. Will that roundabout have stop signs?
I do not know.
Or can we have a proper roundabout?
You know, I don't know. And like I said, it's so early in design that we might not even end up with a roundabout.
I just had to put a little pitch in.
For ones without stop signs? Yeah, I hear you.
Where you would want yield signs.
Hmm?
Yeah.
Like the ones in Bend.
You know what a proper roundabout
Well, I
looks
do, but
like.
the rules are different in the United Kingdom than they are here in terms of what is a roundabout. And so I think some clarity about who's supposed to yield to who and some consistency about who's supposed to yield to who would behoove us moving forward.
Yes,
should
we'll
we have
definitely
more
be having
roundabouts.
those conversations. And like I said, this is a, very early design.
Excuse me, I have a question, Commissioner.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Can you tell me what is the pedestrian traffic in this area?
I don't know the answer to that question. I think the hope is that if we make it safer for pedestrians, more people will walk, and more people specifically will be walking to make those connections to transit in the form of Line 77 and the MAX station.
Yeah, that's kind of around the area that I live, and I'm just not sure that this is an area that pedestrians actually, that there's, I've never seen pedestrians, let me just say, use that area. So it's interesting to think about, is there housing close to this area, and this is why we're thinking about?
Well, so this crossing here at 80th, like I mentioned, is close to that, to join. So that's, that's one source
It's
of
close to the
possible
87 MEX
pedestrians.
station too. It's close to the 82nd MEX station and the
Right.
Well, there's
transit
public
there.
transportation, but I think more importantly, it's a high crash incident zone.
It's on the high crash network for walking. So
so
the
there's
people that
probably good reason people aren't walking there is because they're getting hit.
Right, and so the people that are walking there, we want it to make it safer for them.
Well, I think Commissioner Fritz raised a good point. We don't actually do a good job of educating people about who has the right of way and who doesn't in these kind of roundabout areas. So it does matter if people know who has the right of way.
Sure, and this doesn't exist yet, but I agree, especially with so many new residents pouring into the city every year who have different kind of standards and customs where they're coming from. In addition to congestion, I think that's a real issue. We have some unique rules, and that has been something I've been kind of hammering away on, is public education around pedestrian and traffic safety.
Yeah, and consistency in how we apply
And
this.
when we do these projects, I know at least for the one on Columbia near the middle school, I'm blanking out on the middle school. It'll come to me. George, I was going to say Gregory. George, we have people come out and educate the community about the improvements so that they're not, I'm often concerned when I see like a new hot crossing, for instance, that people are just going to think, oh, great, there's a flashing beacon. It's safe to just stroll out into the street. But if you're strolling out onto a street where people are used to moving or driving unencumbered, unimpeded, that might not be the wisest decision. So we're definitely thinking a lot about that and also taking action.
And while we're on this slide, I'm assuming that this is accepting the grant. When the project comes back, there will be a contract for actually doing it, and that the actual design will come back to council. Is that correct?
Yes.
So looking at these pedestrian crosswalks, I'm going to be extremely reluctant to vote for contracts that don't have the signalized pedestrian crossings with the flashing lights. I think with some of our crosswalks having flashing lights and some of them not, even when there's a sign that says there's a crosswalk coming, if it doesn't happen to have had one of the flashing lights, there's a tendency for drivers not to be thinking, well, there's no flashing lights, therefore I can continue speeding through. And so I think that we need to having the lights as a standard wherever we're encouraging people to cross the road.
Okay, and our traffic engineers will be looking at that. There's certain warrants that need to be met, and there's certain standards for different volumes of pedestrians and cars and bikes. So I can't promise that there'll be a light there. The traffic engineers will determine what the right treatment is, but.
Well, I would strongly encourage you to do so because actually, I've just been in England, so my accent is even thicker than ever. And I've noticed that they've gone away from the so-called zebra crossings. They don't have the stripes anymore. They only have the flashing lights where and in fact, they have only stop lights. So it's not just a warning, it's a, you will stop for these pedestrians. And I think that that's more and more the way that we should be thinking as our we've got traffic designs for now. We need to be looking at traffic designs for the next 50 years. And as we're encouraging more people to walk, we need to make sure that, as Commissioner Udaley said, they will if it's safer.
I hope it's not all the American tourists looking the wrong way when they begin to
Oh, they've got
the
this nice look left, look right on the floor because I'm completely lost.
Very
But yes,
helpful,
it's actually written down. My mother said that it had a lot of controversy about it being the nanny state. And I was like, well, I'm really appreciative because I'm constantly looking the wrong way.
Yeah, don't let me walk London streets unattended because I will probably be mowed down.
Sorry, we digress. Please go
That's
on.
okay. I knew throwing the roundabout in there might generate some conversation.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
thought it keep it lively. All right, so moving on. We're also looking at from Northeast 80th over that structure over I-84, we're proposing to stripe two-way buffered bike lanes on the south side of the structure. Currently, there are no bike facilities. And then continuing at the east end of the structure and onto 92nd Avenue, we're looking at constructing a multi-use path on the south side of the road. Let's see, so for both the buffered bike lanes and the multi-use path, we're not looking at reducing vehicle capacity in Halsey at all. For the multi-use path section, we are proposing to remove parking on the south side of Halsey. So, and that's all. Those are kind of the highlights of the scope. So as far as the schedule goes, we'll start with public involvement and some refinements of the scope this spring as soon as we get the funding from ODOT, and we'll hope to begin design probably late this summer with construction scheduled to start in the summer of 2021 and continuing into 2022. So,
great.
You guys have any other questions?
Colleagues? All right. Carla, is there any testimony?
Yes, we have one person, Charles Bridge Crane.
Welcome back. Please state your name for the record, as you always do.
Thank you, Madam President. One day I'll forget to be Charles Bridge Crane Johnson, but I am right now. And I want to actually thank you for the camaraderie that you all have and the way that it turned to the very important topic of pedestrian safety. And I want to particularly thank Commissioner Fritz, even though I guess I have totally lost track of whose bureaus are what, but you're all transportation commissioners in my heart because you're concerned about our safety. And, she brings up an important point. When, as pedestrians, I'm mostly a pedestrian and transit person, and as an American pedestrian and transit person, I feel just as entitled as automobile owners. When I mash that crosswalk button, if it doesn't turn, I'm just going to go out there in danger. And so we need elected leaders talking about the reality of the way things are when people are getting off the bus and moving as pedestrians. So I hope that there's actually a formal process for the expression here about more signaled crosswalks and also how those signaled crosswalks work. If you build a signaled crosswalk where a pedestrian has to show up and stand for 47 seconds before they can see any of the lights do anything, start to count down, you're really not going to improve safety. There's really no reason why when a person pushes the button, they can't see one of the signs somewhere change and start to count down to a yellow light so that people can move safely. So that's actually how we're going to get to Vision Zero if we really talk honestly and clearly about getting yellow lights to come on when pedestrians push buttons. Obviously, this is except for a few caveats that are tangentially touched on here, this is something you need to push for whenever there's $2.4 million away from available from ODOT, and we only have to spend a little bit. That's great. It was weird coming in at 9:30 and seeing a bunch of testimony forms and not getting to talk to them about now, and having them, a lot of them look like they related to ODOT, and it makes me have a little bit more sympathy for you all about this weird, complicated dance. Because at one hand, we have to do these things where we might give land to ODOT or whatever, but then on the other hand, we're like, ODOT, please get the legislator to give us back 82nd Avenue. So I'm glad to see the council composed of people who will encourage citizens to get into this rational conversation about where should the power of democracy and moving people really rest. Should you mostly not be ever giving powers to ODOT and making sure that local governments, instead of statewide government and state ODOT, have control and power over lands? This kind of relates to a couple of the other upcoming ones. But thank you very much for your attentiveness and your also candor about personal pedestrian experiences.
And I am very curious about our standard for crosswalk buttons, because some of them do seem to respond more quickly than others, and many people believe that they don't do anything at all. So yet another thing to clarify and educate the public about. Colleagues, any further discussion?
Thank you, Commissioner. I just had one thing to add. While those beacon lights make it safe for people to cross, there seems to be a long time that those lights are on. And so I think as we start expanding those, we should really think about, because what it does is just frustrate motorists, right? And you're looking and you're watching and you don't see anybody out in the crosswalk. And so what it does is frustrate folks so that they become less aware that those yellow blinking lights are there. And so I agree with you. I think public education around both the major safety issues that we all care about, but the timing is like, is it really necessary for it to be a minute after everybody's crossed for you to sit there and just wait for the light to be done?
I agree. I'm going to assume that the timing is based on the amount of time someone with a mobility challenge might need to safely cross the street, but I have witnessed the same thing, and I agree that without an understanding, drivers are frustrated and more likely to disregard those lights. Yeah, it's a delicate balance. Okay, this is an emergency item, so Carla, please call the roll.
Fritz.
Good discussion, and thank you for your work. Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Udaly.
Thank you, Nicole. Sorry I somewhat sidetracked your presentation with my question about the roundabout, but it was an interesting conversation or discussion nevertheless. I will vote aye. The ordinance is adopted. Carla, please read item 185.
Authorize the Bureau of Transportation to acquire certain permanent and temporary property rights necessary for construction of the Northeast Columbia, Cully Boulevard, and Alderwood Road intersection improvements project through the exercise of the city's eminent domain authority.
Great. So this item will allow transportation to begin the acquisition of needed property to construct important improvements to the Northeast Columbia and Cully corridor. Marty Maloney with Transportation Right-of-Way Acquisition will explain in more detail the process here, and it's my understanding that we've been in contact with the one business that would be impacted by this acquisition, Hagerman Inc. of Umatilla, Oregon, and those conversations have gone well. I'll leave it up to Marty to expand on those comments. Please proceed.
Hey, Commissioners, my name is Marty Maloney with Peabot Right-of-Way. The agenda item in front of you is to authorize eminent domain authority as well as the ability to offer just compensation for the needed permanent and temporary property rights associated with the Northeast Columbia, Cully Boulevard and Alderwood intersection improvement project. The project will reconstruct the Northeast Columbia, Northeast Alderwood Road intersection and provide signalization to the intersection. The project will also add shoulders and sidewalk at the intersection and restripe the left turn pockets at eastbound Columbia Boulevard to northbound Alderwood Road. All affected property owners have been informed about the city's need for the property rights and have been invited to attend the reading of this council agenda item. I'd be happy to answer any questions council might have at this time.
Any questions? All right, thank you. Carla, is there any testimony?
Yes, Charles Bridge Crane Johnson.
All right, so
Thank you, Madam
I'm
President.
assuming the testimony is going to be pertinent,
Yes.
relevant to the item at hand.
Yes. In the Halsey, it's actually, especially particularly on this one, I don't understand how eminent domain and temporary property rights go together. I noticed there was permanent ones here, but I'm glad that you mentioned Hagerman from Umatilla owning the land.
They don't own it, they actually lease it from the railroad.
Oh, our friends.
Yeah, so it's about a 15-foot strip. Oh. We're going to get staff up here to clarify it.
Sorry.
Awesomeness.
So actually, it's a private property owner, Beal, that owns the property that they leased to Hagerman. There
Okay.
also is a lease from U of P as well that Beal has, and Hagerman uses that, so it's
Okay.
kind of convoluted.
It is convoluted. Thank you for the clarification.
I would love it if it was even slightly more convoluted. I guess the homeless camping, or urban impact reduction, or hookah, or whatever. Many times when you deal with these properties, there's sometimes displacement of already displaced people. I don't think there's anybody we need to particularly protect out there. But when we have these little traditional forums that come up on every one, it's still, we're moving very slowly. The Foster Road shelter hasn't opened. So it'd be, if we were being our best city, the impact on people who reside in that area but aren't normally looked at as residents is an issue. But thank you very much, Commissioner.
Okay. It's currently used as a storage space for Hagerman. So as far as I know, it is not an informal campsite.
Thank you.
Colleagues, any further questions on this item? For staff? No? Okay, thank you. This is an emergency item. Carla, please call the roll.
Fritz.
Glad we finally got to hear it after many times of trying it. Thank you very much for checking with all the property owners. There's no opposition to this, is my understanding. Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Udaly.
Thank you, and aye. The ordinance is adopted. Carla, please read item 186.
Authorize the Bureau of Transportation to acquire certain temporary rights necessary for construction of the Springwater Connector project through the exercise of the city's eminent domain authority.
This is just like our last item in that it authorizes transportation to begin the process of acquiring needed property to construct an important link in the Springwater corridor. Marty Maloney is here again.
Yep.
We're still here.
Yep.
To quickly walk us through the item. Marty, welcome.
Good morning again. Marty Maloney with Peabot Right-of-Way. The agenda item is to authorize eminent domain authority as well as to offer just compensation for the needed temporary rights associated with this project. The Springwater Connector project will connect the 70s and 80s greenways with the Springwater Trail. Proposed project elements include pavement markings, wayfinding signs, speed bumps, pedestrian scale lighting, tree planting, and improvements of 2 sections of gravel streets. All affected property owners have been informed about the city's needs for property rights and have been invited to attend the reading of this council item. Any questions or for council?
Mr. Maloney, I'm not familiar with this particular stretch. Are the property owners primarily residential or commercial?
Residential.
Okay. And is all of the work or is all the property being acquired on a residential lot?
Correct, yeah, they're all temporary construction easements as well. So we're using existing right-of-way for the permanent improvements, and the temporary property rights just give us the ability to support construction of those improvements.
And were there any concerns raised by adjacent property owners?
None that I've heard, no.
All right. Colleagues? Okay. Thank you for that. Carla, is there any testimony?
Yes, Charles Bridge Crane Johnson.
Charles Bridge Crane Johnson, and this is even more strictly limited as you prefer to item 186. On the electronic agenda, we, the public, have, when we click on Exhibit A under 186, we think we're going to talk about, I always thought of Springwater Corridor as southeast, but when I click on Exhibit A, I get something that says Northeast Halsey Street bike and pedestrian transit improvements.
That was, you got them two mixed up. You testified on this one last time.
I'm just saying that electronically that was linked. So I guess there was a technical difficulty in getting the electronic presentation put together. So just want that to be all to your attention. We've covered this really thoroughly. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you. We'll make sure that is fixed for anyone wanting to access that item in the future, right? Great. Colleagues, any further discussion? This is another emergency item. Carla, please call the roll.
Fritz.
Thanks again. Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Udaly.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. Aye. The ordinance is adopted. Carla, please read item 187.
Accept funding and authorize an intergovernmental agreement with Washington County for $1 million for Southwest Multnomah Garden Home Intersection Safety Project.
This is a second reading. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Carla, please call the roll.
Fritz.
I'm disappointed that I missed yet another good roundabout discussion. I really appreciate the Brad Taylor Group partnering with PBOT and doing the public outreach. It's hard to remember something that's been as thorough as this. Mailers to 8,000 residents, going door to door, community meetings, open house, being at the recreation center, the marketplace, etc. So really a great amount of public input, and I appreciate the partnership of the Brad Taylor Group with PBOT, and it looks like a great project. I'm looking forward to seeing what design they come up with. Thank you for your work. Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Udaly.
Well, thank you for the compliment, Commissioner Hardesty. I am very committed to thorough public engagement, and as
I'm Fritz.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Fritz. Oh, I was doing so good today. So good. Everyone has to make that mistake at least once.
I know.
Okay, I know. I'm going to repeat something I said to the Southwest Corridor Project Committee that I am now a member of, which is property owners do not equal the public, which means if we are going to notify the public, we have to notify everyone. That's property owners, residential, renters, businesses, et cetera. And so I think we've done a really thorough job with this one. I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted. Carla, please read item 188.
Assess property for sidewalk repair for the Portland Bureau of Transportation.
Oh, fantastic. Someone is magically appearing because I wasn't sure whose item this was going to be.
Good
with the mayor's
afternoon.
absence. So, yes, thank you. Welcome.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm Sherry Matias from the Auditor's Office.
And I'm Mike Zeller from Sidewalk Repair and Maintenance Operations.
Welcome.
This ordinance is for sidewalk repair on property that is required by the city. Any remonstrances? Yeah.
Not too close, though, about that far.
Any remonstrances have been pulled and not in this ordinance.
Great. Carla, is there any questions for staff? No? Carla, any testimony on the item?
Yes, we have 3 people signed up. Is that Adele in the green pen? Sorry, Adeline. And we have Charles Bridge Johnson and Grace McNeely.
Anybody?
So, Charles, the remonstrances have been withdrawn, which means there's no objection from the property owners.
Yeah.
And the other 2 who signed up, I may be reading your name wrong. If you signed up for this item, you can come on up.
I'm just trivially curious that this gets on the agenda without, is it many locations citywide? You know, Commissioner Fish, you mentioned that certain remonstrances have been withdrawn. That's great. Do you know, can you say anything about if it's one site, multiple sites, or anything
Multiple
like that?
sites. but
Multiple sites.
It comes to us as a package. If the remonstrances have been filed, then those are pulled. So the only things that come to us are ones for which there is no controversy.
Groovy. Thanks. Look forward to your aye voting.
Okay, that concludes public testimony. Colleagues, any further discussion? This is the first reading of a non-emergency item. It moves to second reading. We will, well, and we've already done the pulled items from the consent agenda,
Madam
right?
President?
Yes, Commissioner Fish?
We don't have an afternoon council today, but I would like to say that, as speaking as your colleague and your friend, I appreciate the way that you keep our meetings moving along. And I've often thought that the tradition of the mayor automatically chairing the meeting wasn't necessarily such a great benefit to a mayor, because chairing a meeting takes a lot of energy and a lot of focus. It makes it harder to be an advocate on issues when you're also moving things along. I've often thought that the mayor ought to consider rotating the gavel, because it's a ministerial function, and frankly, I think some people inherently are better at it than others. But I just want to say I appreciate the way you move the agenda forward and keep us on task, and you get us out of here at a reasonable time for lunch. It's much appreciated.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I second that.
Thank you, Commissioner. That is all for today. We are adjourned.